And we are back. Notre Dame Nation, IB Nation, welcome back to the Friday episode of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. And you know what that means? That means it's prediction time. We're going to talk about Notre Dame, Boston College, USC, UCLA, Utah, Oregon, Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, and several other very, very intriguing games this weekend. It's kind of like a separation Saturday a little bit, Ryan. You know, there's some things on the line for teams in regard to conference division championship games and conference championship game or division championships and conference championship games. But for Notre Dame, there's not so much a championship on the line as more as it's just an opportunity for Notre Dame to say, hey, we're going to finally take whatever steps we need to take this season to become the best team we can be right now based on our current circumstance. And they're a bit of a banged up team. You know, I think Brandon Joseph's probably not going to play tomorrow. There's a couple other guys who are going to be doubtful for tomorrow. But it's still a game that Notre Dame should go out and not only win, but, you know, look, if this team's going to play their game, it's a game they should dominate. But will they do that? I don't know. It's almost kind of like every time I see a line come out that says Notre Dame minus 17 or I'm like, oh, man. Like, that means they're going to play like garbage tomorrow. But hopefully this is the game they turn the corner, Ryan, because it's an opportunity for Notre Dame to say, hey, look, what we were in the past, we're not that team anymore. It's an opportunity to build some momentum getting ready for USC. We broke all that down during the week. We did our keys to victory. We did the matchup. We did everything that you would want to know on the site at irishbreakdown.com and here. And it all leads to this, Ryan, and it is prediction time. But just at the beginning, Ryan, just kind of what is the one thing I would ask you that you're really hoping that you see from Notre Dame coming out of this game? Like, what's the one thing, the biggest thing? There's several, but what's the biggest thing that if you come out of this game and this happens, you're going to feel like, yeah, this team has really put itself on a good step forward?
Well, we talked about this a little bit last week, but it's just a simple fact that we now know that Notre Dame can play with some of the best teams in the country. You know, they went toe-to-toe with Ohio State. Obviously, that one did not come out the way they wanted on the scoreboard at the final whistle, but then you dominate a Clemson team at home, a place that you had been struggling at for the majority of the season until that Clemson game. So you're showing that you can defeat and you can play with some of the best teams in the country, which Notre Dame hasn't been able to do in recent years. You know, working back to the previous coaching tenure and even before that, it's been a long time since Notre Dame has consistently played and beaten some of the best teams in college football. But the next step, Brian, and we talked about this last week going into the Navy game, is, okay, we can play with anybody in the country. Our talent is on display. We can compete. Now, the teams that we should bury, we have to come out and play dominant football. And you saw that against Navy, at least on the offensive side of the football, for a half. You saw that. It was 35-13 at halftime. But Notre Dame still wasn't able to put that exclamation point in last week's game and really show that, hey, and against the inferior opponents, we're not going to let this be a game. We're not going to let things get close. We are going to dominate from start to finish. That's what I'm hoping to see tomorrow, because there's no question that Notre Dame is the better team. There's no question that they're much more talented than Boston College. But I'm still waiting for that killer instinct, not just about beating the great teams, but also taking care of business and showing dominance on a week-to-week basis and beating a team that, in all honesty, from a talent perspective, is not even close to you. You are the superior. So I want to see them really take that step forward and dominate Boston College from start to finish. Because I didn't see it last week. I want to see a dominant opportunity for Notre Dame to show how good they can be when they put everything together.
I think that's the thing for me, Ryan, is I want to see this team put together a 60-minute performance and what that would look like. You know, we saw it against Clemson. I don't say it's easier to do that, but it's easier to do that. The magnitude of the moment allows you to have that extra burst. I want to see them come out in a game like this and do that as well. Am I predicting that to happen? No, I'm not, which we'll kind of get into my predictions, but I'm also not predicting what we saw last week. I'm not predicting what we saw against Stanford. I'm kind of predicting a little bit of a happy medium, Ryan, and that's kind of where we are now as we dive into our predictions for this game. So first thing I want to do, we're going to do a little bit different this week, but the first thing I want to do, Ryan, is we'll give our staff predictions, and then we'll kind of dive into how we see the game playing out. And then what we'll do then is we'll talk about, as we're doing that, is what are the two matchups that are going to have the biggest outcome for Notre Dame to reach their potential on both sides of the ball. So 2 on offense and 2 on defense. And then we're also going to have some fun is we're going to predict game balls. So if the game plays out how you think it's going to play out, who gets your game balls? And so we're going to have a little bit of fun with that. But let's begin by talking about what the rest of the Irish Breakdown staff had, the people that are not on this show. Vince D'Addario predicted a 37-14 Notre Dame victory. Sean Davis predicted a 24-13 Notre Dame victory. Sean Stiers predicted a 27-20 victory. So those two guys predicted a little bit close. The biggest blowout of the weekend came from Andrew McDonough, who predicted a 34-6 Notre Dame victory. So with that being said, Mr. Ryan Roberts, Mr. Director of Recruiting at Irish Breakdown, what is your prediction and how do you see the game playing out based on that prediction?
I'm not going to lie, Brian. My final score that I ended up predicting was a lower score for the Notre Dame side of things than I originally had written down. So for me, look, I think that there's clear advantages on both sides of the football for Notre Dame. We'll get into some of the keys, obviously, with, just the key parts of the football game and some game balls, and I'll kind of become pretty apparent what I believe is kind of the spots that Notre Dame has the biggest advantages and the biggest question marks in this football game. But I ultimately think that Notre Dame's dudes are just better than Boston College's dudes. And I think that Notre Dame's defensive line, for the most part, recently over the last few games, has been playing a lot better and more consistent football. And I think when you look at Boston College, man, like that offensive line is just not very good. It's just not. I mean, there's no other way to paint it. So I had Notre Dame 31, Boston College 13. I originally had written down 38-13 in a little bit more of a deciding fashion, but I think that I kind of came down to the sense of, hey, Notre Dame is good enough to really work this team and dominate them. But we have seen mixed results offensively, obviously, from a game-to-game perspective or even a half-to-half perspective last week. So I had to take the point down a little bit. Either way, I still think Notre Dame wins this one pretty convincingly. Might be a little underselling what Notre Dame might be able to do offensively against the struggling Boston College defense, but I'm going to take it 31-13 Notre Dame over Boston College this Saturday.
My prediction, Ryan, was somewhat similar. We weren't that far off. As a matter of fact, we were just a field goal off. I went 34-13. I'm predicting a happy medium. I could see this being a 2016, 20-13 game, not the 2016 game, but a 20-16 game, a 21-13 game, a game where Notre Dame just kind of slugs their way through it. And as you said, their dudes are just better than Boston College dudes. I could also see this as being a game, Ryan, and I'm with you. I actually had a significantly higher initial outcome. I initially had 42-13. And the reason I went 13, and I think this is going to be the first time since 2017 that Notre Dame does not hold a single opponent under 10 points in a game, because this team has just shown defensively it's always going to allow at least one dumb touchdown drive in a game. Just one, like, play prevent defense or some dumb mistake or something that's going to happen where you're like, why did you do that? And it's the maddening part about this defense, because they can look so good for so much of a game and then just do stuff you're like, what are you doing? So they'll give up a touchdown drive and a field goal drive, and then something else will happen. They'll get 13 points. I would like to be wrong about that. I would love to see this defense finally come out and just play dominant football, but I just don't see that for completely 60 minutes. But I could see a scenario where the defense does that and the offense just comes out and rolls, just runs it down BC's throat. Drew Pine hits a couple big plays. And look, Ryan, here's where it comes down to. What have we seen Notre Dame do this year? They've risen to the moments, right? And whether it's Ohio State or North Carolina or Clemson, which were big game opponents, or the Shamrock series, where even though they kind of got a sloppy in the third quarter, which we have seen, they did come out really well in that game. And at one point, them had a 25-6 lead. And BYU is not a great team, but they're better than Boston College. I could see something where Senior Day is sort of the event that causes this team to be locked in. And we a lot of times we talk about, well, is it a distraction? Can it create where your team doesn't play sharp? Sure, that can happen. But there's also the flip side of it, is it being Senior Day and these kids wanting to go out sort of this way says this is why we're locked in. Hey, I'm locked in because I want to make sure that I send my guy out, a winner, a big winner, whatever the case may be. And then if that happens, you're talking about a 42, a 45-13 type of game. I could see that as well. I went 34-13 because I just don't think Notre Dame can do that for 60 minutes in this kind of game. We just haven't seen it. I don't think Notre Dame has enough willingness to open the game up in good conditions. I definitely don't see them opening the thing up in these conditions. I think it'll be an excuse to just kind of come out and pound the ball down Boston College's throat. I think the reason I got to 34 is it's going to be like we saw against Syracuse. It's going to be like what we saw against Clemson. They'll have a defensive series that turns the ball over. They'll have a special team. Something will happen on special teams, and Notre Dame will score 34 points. But it won't look like, it'll look more convincing than it actually is what I think will happen, Ryan. And so I went 34-13. I hope I'm wrong on that. I hope that this is the game where Notre Dame just kind of comes out and just completely blasts them. I'm not really concerned when I watch Boston College. I don't think they have it in them to come here and beat Notre Dame, especially with the conditions. 5 years ago, BC might have been able to do that because they were a big physical line and they could run the football. This team cannot. And so I think the weather greatly plays into Notre Dame hands, and I could see a 20-3 type of thing as well. But I just don't think BC's capable of beating Notre Dame this year. But they are capable of making enough big plays with their pass game, and with Notre Dame playing their boring, hey, let's grind out and run duo. Let's see if we can set a record for running the most play, the same play in a row, in college football history. I could see that, but I think that's kind of how it'll go. Notre Dame's dudes will just, like you said, Notre Dame's dudes are better than their dudes, and that ultimately is going to be the outcome. But I am hoping that I'm wrong on that, and I am hoping that they kind of come out and just this team is lit. They just light it up and just kind of come out, run the ball real effectively, mix up the run game, get the ball out of the perimeter, do the smart things that you can do even in these conditions. Get the ball to your tight ends, get the ball to your running backs, use 21 personnel. Be willing to take a couple shots, just a couple quick 3-step bam, let her rip to Braden Lindsey type of shots. I mean, those are things that there's no reason you can't do that in these conditions, and, throw the ball 17 times, go 12 of 17 for 200 yards, because you were creative with how you did it. There's no reason you can't do that. Will they do that? We'll see. But I'm at the point now, Ryan, we're in game 11, dude. And if it's it hasn't happened now, I'd be silly to predict that it's going to happen now. But it doesn't mean I can't root for it to happen or wish that it'll happen. And that's kind of basically where I'm at with that prediction, Ryan.
This is a weird one, Brian, because I know we've talked about weather in a couple other games where we kind of said, it's probably more of a neutral factor than helping one team or the other. I do think this weather helps Notre Dame in this game specifically because I think Notre Dame's, obviously just the more larger and more physical team for one, but then also how Boston College's offense is constructed. Like they just can't run the football very well. And when they do want to throw the ball, they want to be a vertically oriented team, whether it is Phil Dracovic or Emmett Moorhead. And I don't think that plays into their favor in these types of conditions, to your point, right? So it is interesting that I actually do think that weather will be a factor on Saturday for this outcome.
Well, you talk about their pass game, Ryan. They are a pro-style team. I mean, John McNulty is an NFL coach, and him and Tommy Rees had a lot of things in common with how they like to go about offensive football, throw the ball downfield. Take your play action shots, slower developing routes that take time to get going and all that. They're not a college team where like Clemson would be able to better handle these conditions schematically, right? Just like I thought they were able to handle the conditions of that other night because they have so much quick game, RPOs, screens built into their offense that they can still get the ball on the perimeter, even in bad conditions. That's why I didn't feel like the wind wasn't the reason that Clemson couldn't move the ball and score on Notre Dame. Getting dominated up front and Notre Dame's guys just locking Clemson's guys down is why they did it. Yep. This game is different. They're going to ask Phil Dracovic or Emmett Moorhead, whoever, and it sounds more and more like it's going to be Emmett Moorhead because Phil Dracovic just isn't healthy yet. But it's going to sound more and more like they're going to ask that. And if they are going to throw a lot of quick game, I would think Notre Dame would be kind of foolish to just kind of come up and just let them get the ball out 5-6 yards at a time. That'd be kind of silly. Like, I know you don't want to just let Zay Flowers, get one-on-one against cover one, I get that, but you got to kind of trust your line to say, hey, we're gonna be able to heat him up, and he's not gonna have time to get that ball out. Or maybe you double team Zay Flowers over the top, and then you go man on everybody else, and then make sure you get to the quarterback. But they're just not a team that can quickly go adjust, or shouldn't be a team, unless their name kind of allows them, that can just run the quick game and get the ball out quickly and have the things that allow them to kind of overcome the conditions. It shouldn't be that way. Now, whether or not Notre Dame allows that to happen or not, it's a different conversation. But they're just not built for that based on what we've seen the first 10 games of the season.
No, they're not. It's not advantageous to them, in my opinion. Like, it's really not. I think that you're hindered. I mean, you're hindered. The offensive line hinders everything, Brian, because for me, you mentioned the pro style system, that McNulty, and just kind of from the NFL tree, right? Like they want to be able to run the football and then work a lot of stuff off of play action. Just the simple fact that Boston College has been so poor in trying to run the football, averaging 2.1 yards per carry on the year, you're behind the eight ball just in general. And I don't think that it being a snowy game and cold and all that good stuff, like, that doesn't help your run game if you're Boston College, right? Like, I don't think that gives you a massive bump where now your play action game is going to get more potent off of the run game. Like, Boston College is just not a good running team. Offensive line is not playing very well. Pat Garwo looks uncertain with what he's got to working through right now. So it's just there's no excuses for Notre Dame as far as the weather or anything like that. Like, it's not a monsoon. We're not expecting Notre Dame to throw the ball 40 times in a monsoon in this game, right? Like, I think the weather is very much in their favor.
It's kind of funny you talk about that, Ryan. We've come a long way since that, right? Now we're like in the opposite direction. Like, seriously, you guys are just going to run the ball and like not even try to throw anymore. Whereas before, 6 years ago, it's like, you guys are seriously trying to throw the ball in a monsoon? Like, seriously? And we talk about that game, but the Clemson game the year before wasn't much different, if we're going to be completely honest with you. I mean, they tried to throw the ball a lot in that game as well, if you remember correctly, with Deshaun Kaiser. Now, they ended up hitting some plays late, but they had some fumbles and some other situations. But yeah, they threw the ball 34 times, and it was just as rainy that day as it was against NC State. It just wasn't as windy, and it wasn't piling up as much because it was, obviously it was a different type of situation. But yeah, we've come a long way since then, Brian. There's no doubt.
Maybe a little overcorrection on Notre Dame's part right now, but yes, it is polar opposites to what it used to be, without a doubt.
Yeah. So, Ryan, let's get to this part of it. What are the two matchups for Notre Dame to – so, actually, no, first, if the game plays out how you think it's going to play out, who are your game balls? Who's your offensive, defensive, and special team game balls going to go to?
Look, I think there's a little predictive nature to how I see this football game coming to fruition, I should say. So I think offensively, I think Notre Dame is going to run the football a ton. And I think that the running back that I believe will be able to really wear down this defense, which is not a huge defense. We haven't talked about that a ton, but I mean, they have their best defensive ends, 236 pounds. Their linebackers are all like 225 or less, right? Like, they're not a big front seven. I think Audric Estime has a chance to really wear down on this defense. I do, down the stretch especially. I know we haven't seen him be a four-quarter guy quite to this point, but I think really in the second half he's going to be able to wear it down, because I think Notre Dame is going to be able to establish a better running game than they did last week, without a doubt. So Audric Estime offensively. Defensively, I believe for me, it's going to be someone in the secondary, because, again, we've talked about we need to stop Zay Flowers. He's the guy that I think is going to create a massive mismatch in different spots, working inside and working out. I'm actually going to go with Cam Hart in this one, Brian. And it's more – I think that Tariq Bracy, especially early in the year, he was a stalwart performer every single week. You saw it, right? Benjamin Morrison now has had a couple really nice games in a row, especially obviously the game against Clemson where he's the player of the game. We haven't really seen Cam have that type of game yet this year, right? Like, we've seen glimpses of the old Cam, but it's been very up and down. So I'm going to say on senior day, we get an opportunity for Cam Hart Sr. I know he's still got the junior eligibility with COVID and all that type of stuff. I'm going to say Cam Hart has a big impact. So Cam Hart defensively, Audric Estime offensively.
Interesting. Based on how I have the game playing out, we're on the same page on the offensive side of the ball. I think it'll be one of the backs, and I'm going to go with Audric Estime just because of how they use the backs. And I'm going to go with Isaiah Foskey because I don't think Cam Hart's going to get a chance to make as many plays on the back end because the defensive line is going to make sure that the quarterback's getting rattled. I could see a situation where Cam Hart puts up the kind of numbers, breakups, and picks that could get you player of the game. But it's because of the pressure that the defensive line, which will be led by Isaiah Foskey, makes. I think Isaiah Foskey ends his last home game at Notre Dame as the school's all-time sack leader. That's what I think is going to happen on Saturday. So, and then special teams, I'm going John Sott. I think he's going to pin them deep. I think he's going to not allow BC to really get anything going in the return game, and that's going to be a key part of the game for me. I'm going to have a little fun with this one. If the game goes how I think it can go, if Tommy Rees does what he's capable of doing, or if he's, opens it up a little bit, does things we're talking about, 21 personnel, all that kind of stuff, then I think the player of the game will be Braden Lindsey, because I think we'll see a jet sweeper reverse for a big play. I think we'll see him take a couple shots down the field, whether it be like deep overs or whether it be go route, something where we'll take a couple shots, maybe an RPO, maybe like a tunnel screen where Braden's able to catch and split. I think we'll see Braden Lindsey be the player of the game if Tommy Rees is willing to open it up, and if Marcus Freeman lets him open up, because I have heard people say, well, Marcus Freeman's telling Tommy what to do. I don't think that's the case, but this is the kind of day where a head coach could step in and say, hey, look, it's windy, it's snowy, let's just, go out there and do this. I hope that's not the case, but if he does what I think he's capable of doing, then I'm going to go with Braden Lindsey. My defensive one doesn't change. I think the defense is who they are. Right, and they've been pretty good, not great, but pretty good, and I think that's where I'm going to go on that one. Now, if Notre Dame's going to play to their potential, Ryan, what are the two matchups on both sides of the ball that are going to be most important to that? I think defensively, you kind of already talked about one a little bit, right? It's like Cam Hart versus, it'll be Zay Flowers. Actually, it'll be Zay Flowers a lot, but because Zay plays to the field a lot, he'll also play in the slot at some. So that's kind of one, I think, Ryan. What is the other defensive matchup you're looking for to say, hey, if they can thrive here, then I think this team has a chance to really play to its potential. So we'll start with the defense.
Yeah, I mean, for me, Brian, I think that it's actually an interesting conversation because it's definitely a defensive line versus offensive line battle, because I'm a big believer in, hey, the first part of my conversation was, let's take away their strength, or at least let's limit their strength. We know Zay Flowers is that guy. They have some wide receivers that can do some damage. So secondary-wise, someone needs to come to play and make a couple of big plays, and they collaborative effort to stopping a guy like a Zay Flowers. But the other side of the coin is that I believe that you also need to make a weakness continue to be a weakness. And that offensive line is a weakness. We all know that. So, I don't have to keep reiterating that. So I thought about Isaiah Foskey. I thought about Riley Mills. I ultimately settled in on Jason Adamalola for some interior pressure in this football game, because I think what's going to give quarterbacks some issues, these players in particular, is that immediate pressure is not going to work into the hands of Emmett Moorhead or Phil Dracovic if he's able to play. So I think interior pressure is going to be huge, and I also think, although the offensive tackles aren't very good, but I do believe that the guards are even worse. It's not a very good group inside. The centers, has some promise. Eventually, I think he'll be a good football player. But right now, the interior offensive line is an issue for Boston College. So I'm going to say, outside of the Zay Flowers plan defensively from a coverage perspective, give me Jason Adamalola to have a big game with some interior pressure on senior day.
Other side of the ball.
Oh, sorry. Other side of the football. I believe that for me, we need to eliminate the best player on each side of the football. And I think that for me, it's going to be Michael Mayer versus whoever is in the slot for Boston College. Because I think Josh DeBerry is going to play there a lot. But I think that you need to force some mismatches where DeBerry has to play against your best slot option in Michael Mayer when he's able to work in that profile and work in that spot. And whether it is also mixing in some Jane Thomas, Lorenzo Styles, I think the slot position could be a big big element to this football game for Notre Dame because I don't think the safeties are very good. I think the linebackers are kind of slow to react. So I think the seams are going to be a big opportunity for Notre Dame. So I'm going to pencil it in for Michael Mayer versus Josh DeBerry. But in totality, it's Notre Dame's slot options versus whoever is going to be a slot defender for Boston College, whether that is Josh DeBerry in the nickel, whether it is one of the linebackers playing overhang, like a Cam Arnold, for instance, or a safety coming down. Whoever that is, I think that Notre Dame's players in the slot, tight end, or slot receiver alike will have an opportunity to have a big impact in this football game.
And that's why part of me earlier in the day, Ryan, when I was thinking about player of the game, I was thinking about Michael Mayer. I wouldn't be shocked if that's the key. I could see him getting like 8 catches for 100 yards and he rips off like one play where they come up and play cover 0 and Notre Dame just runs like a wide fade to him and Drew hits this one. I could see that. I could see Mayer being a big part of the game plan as well. So, and I hope that's true because that means that they're want to throw the ball a little bit. The matchups for me, I think it's the edges. I think that's the big thing for me. The Notre Dame tackles have to play well against not just the defensive ends. I think they can handle that. They need to really handle the pressures that BC is likely going to bring because of what we've seen from BC, but also because of what Navy showed and what some other teams have shown at times is Notre Dame can really struggle at times with edge pressures. And I don't mean edge pressures in like defensive ends because Notre Dame's tackles eat that stuff up. It's when teams bring overloads from one side. There at times with the tackles can be some confusion on who to pick up, and then there's some problems with the backs and things like that. So I think that's going to be a really important part of this game. And then the other one to me on offense is I want to see the outside receivers against the BC corners. And that's going to be in twofold. The reason I think that's a key matchup, it's not just because they need to make some plays, but I think there's going to be a couple opportunities this game where Notre Dame is going to get the ball on the second level with the backs. And if the receivers are able to block at a high level, you're going to see some of those 10-yard runs turn into bigger runs. I think that's going to be a big part of this game as well. I could see that being a huge, huge part of this game as well. Defensively, it's the Notre Dame defensive ends against the Boston College offensive tackles. I want to see them absolutely dominate this game. And then the other one is whoever's checking Zay Flowers. I think we're going to see Cam Hart and Tariq Bracy against him a lot, and they both need to play really good football because he's the one guy. If Zay Flowers doesn't go off, BC has no chance to win this game unless Notre Dame just turns the ball over a bunch, right? Like that to me is the only way that they can have any shot to win this game is that because he is a dynamic player. And the crazy thing is teams try to take him out and it's just hard because he's going to get free a few times. Very few teams have been able to take him out of the game the last 2 years. A lot, and even then sometimes, Ryan, you study the All-22. There's times he's open, even in those games where he gets shut down, but the quarterback's getting sacked. You know what I mean? Or he's getting pressured and they can't find him. He's a really special player. And I'd like to point out too for all the people that I know one of our longtime followers on the site is just one of those people that just if Notre Dame signs a 3-star, he absolutely loses his mind. I would just like to point out that Zay Flowers was the number 1,212 player in the country coming out of high school. He was the number 139 wide receiver, and he was ranked as the number 165 player in the state of Florida coming out of high school. So maybe you might want to let it play out a little bit before we start freaking out every time a Notre Dame offers a kid that's a 3-star recruit. So we'll see how it plays out, but those are my matchups, Ryan, and that's kind of our prediction for Notre Dame and Boston College. I think, look, Ryan, we've talked about it. It's going to be hard for BC to win this game. It's going to be hard for them to really be competitive in this game. It's going to be more about Notre Dame. It's going to be whether or not Notre Dame can go out there and play their game. If they can play their game, they'll win, and they'll win comfortably. If they don't, it'll be a much closer game than it's supposed to. And we'll see which one it is. So I hope that we see this team end their regular season with a really convincing home win. I do want to point this out. Jay Henry asked, any chance Morrison gets some reps against Zay Flowers? Zay Flowers doesn't play in the boundary a whole lot from what I have seen. So in that instance, Jay, I don't see that happening. I don't see him getting a whole lot of matchups because I number one, I don't think Boston College would want to put him against Notre Dame's best corner. I don't think that's necessarily a matchup that they want to get to. I think if anything, if I'm in Boston College, I'm going to try to get him on Cam Hart and make Cam Hart chase him. That's what I'm going to try to do. I think Tariq Bracy's a guy maybe you can have some success with, but he's been pretty good in the slot against guys like Josh Downs and other really good players. So I don't know if that's the matchup they want to get to there. And again, he doesn't play the boundary a ton. He'll play it at times, but that's kind of basically where it's going to be. So I don't think we'll see that a whole lot. So that's the breakdown for Notre Dame and Boston College prediction. We're going to have some other big predictions coming up here in a minute, but let's kind of just put a quick recap for tomorrow. Tomorrow's game is going to be at 2:30 on NBC. We will have a post-game show after the game tomorrow, and it'll be as soon as we get home. So as soon as Vince and I get home from the game, we'll be able to rock. We'll be ready to rock and roll. So we'll definitely be ready for that. And then also to just give some of you a heads up for next week, we are going to try to figure out a way as a staff to get all of our TVs, our watching options kind of coordinated. And we're going to give it a shot to see about doing like a live chat during the game where we kind of just watch the game and talk about what we're seeing and just kind of have like a, people say like the Manning cast and that, something like that, but we'll kind of put our own spin on it and kind of do it the way we like to do it. But we are definitely thinking about doing that next week. And so far the feedback on that has been pretty good. So I think we're going to spend this next week trying to figure out a way to make it happen. So somebody asked about bowl predictions. We'll get into that here after the weekend and the next couple of weeks. There's a lot of football to play before we get to that point. So that's going to do it for this part of the show. We're going to have the preview of the other big games coming up next. But before we go, please hit that like button. Please hit that subscribe button. Please hit the notification bell. Share this podcast. We would greatly appreciate it. If you're listening via podcast platform, please give us a 5-star review. We would greatly appreciate that very, very much. Also, we would like for you to sign up for the message boards. Give that a shot. That's our premium message board. We had a question earlier. Somebody, David Lowe, asked if we've heard any updates on Jeremiah Love. That question right there was asked earlier, and that's why you have to be on the message board, because there was an update on Jeremiah Love earlier this week, and we did talk about that. We did give intel on that. We also had a big recruiting update with where things stand with the 2023 recruits, but that stuff is that's on the premium board. So that's where we're going to keep that stuff. And for the most part, sometimes we'll tell it later, but for right now, we're going to keep a lot of that on the premium board because we want you guys to be a part of that. So you're going to have to check that out, David, if you want to kind of find the latest. And as everybody knows, Ryan and IB have been locked into that recruitment for some time. So we like where that one's going. So we're going to get to some other games here next, but that's going to do it for the Irish Breakdown version of the Notre Dame Boston College, I should say, predictions of today's Irish Breakdown show. All right, now we're going to get into some national games, and we'll get Ryan back here in a little bit. There's some very intriguing games this weekend. As always, we're going to kind of just go down the line. There's a lot of games. The interesting thing about this weekend, and what I think makes week 12 so intriguing, is there's so much on the line. You look at, last week, UCF gets a big win over Tulane, really convincing win over Tulane. They kind of take control of sort of the group of 5 bowl game. They take control of that. They're now 8-2. They've lost ECU and Louisville, but they're the highest ranked now group of 5 team. They climbed up into the teens this past week. Or no, are they 20th now? So they're sitting at 20th. Tulane is right behind them, I think, at 21. And then you have Cincinnati at 25. So they're sitting pretty, whereas if UCF wins out, they've got a shot. And they're going to get a rematch against either Cincinnati or Tulane in the AAC title game. But then they've got a game against Navy this weekend. And we've seen Navy can be a little bit of a dangerous team. You look at Illinois and Michigan. A couple weeks ago, I had some people kind of looking at that game as a potential upset game. And Sean Davis actually picked that as his upset game this week for Irish Breakdown, which is also on the premium board as well. And so you can check, you can see he obviously thinks that. Of course, he's a little biased because he is, he obviously is an Illinois grad. So, but hey, I think that would be very interesting. Does Michigan overlook a struggling Illinois team? Who's a banged up Illinois team? Do they overlook them with Ohio State coming up next week? We shall see. I don't think that they will. I think Michigan's going to handle business, but I certainly would like it. There's like a lot of games like that. There's a lot of teams looking to kind of salvage their season. to kind of salvage their season. And it, like, Florida, for example, playing at Vanderbilt. Florida's 6-4. They've been struggling, and they've got Vanderbilt at home, and then they play at Florida State next week. They've got to go out and handle business against teams they're supposed to beat. Purdue is sitting there with a great opportunity. They're going to need some help, but Purdue at 6-4 with Northwestern at home this week and then Indiana next week. You can't overlook that. And then some other intriguing games as well. Duke at Pitt. That's a very fascinating game. Duke's 7-3. It's really fascinating to see what Duke has done this year. At 7-3, they've got some quality wins on their schedule. They beat Miami. They beat Boston College. Beat Miami on the road. They beat Boston College on the road. They beat Virginia this year. They beat Northwestern this year. They're coming off a 17-point win over Virginia Tech. And they're 7-3, but now they've got at Pitt this weekend and then Wake Forest the next weekend. So, can they split those two and go 8-4, maybe even win out and go 9-3? Pitt's really scuffling right now offensively. So there's a lot of games like that. But of course, and then there's upset games. Kansas State at West Virginia. West Virginia is a weird team. There's weeks where West Virginia looks really good, really dangerous. Blew out Virginia Tech early in the season, and last week they beat Oklahoma, and then they lose the week before they beat Oklahoma. They lose by 17 to Iowa State, who's just really not good this year. So that's going to be a very fascinating game as well. So I wanted to dive into the games here before Ryan. With Ryan, but he has got something going on, so hopefully he'll be back here in a minute. So I am going to get to a couple questions before we dive into the Week 16 games. So we'll kind of go over a little bit reverse order on some of this and do a little bit of the mailbag now. But Rob Osgood said, my prediction is 42-14, Notre Dame 42, BC 14. But what I want is a complete game from start to finish. Get ready for USC. I want to see 250 rushing yards, 250 passing yards, complete game. Honestly, Rob, that'd be phenomenal. I'll tell you this right now, though. If Notre Dame rushes for at least 250 yards and at least 200 and passes for at least 250 yards against Boston College, they'll win by a lot more than 42-14, in my opinion. A lot more in my view. I think they'll really steamroll. I think that's like a 50-something point performance from this Notre Dame team if we see that. So that would be very fascinating to see. Brian Hockney has a mailbag question. How many recruits will sign on December 19th? How many sign in February? So obviously Notre Dame is still trying to close. Right now, Notre Dame has 23 players committed in the class. As of right now, we expect all 23 to sign and, and be part of the class. They're still trying to recruit Kenny Minchie, who will be on campus this weekend. We did a preview on that at Irish Breakdown yesterday, so you can go check that out. We also know that they're still recruiting Caleb Smith. They're recruiting Christopher Tarrick, an offensive lineman from Illinois, who is committed to Wisconsin. They're also recruiting Khalil Barnes and Brandon Hillman. So as of right now, the plan is to try to get to around 27. There's a chance, depending on how things happen postseason. So there's going to be some kids leave, some kids transfer, some decisions made like that after the season between the bowl game. And how those shake out and whether or not Notre Dame anticipates those or not is going to go a long way towards determining just how many kids Notre Dame is able to push this class to in 2023. So we'll see how that kind of goes. But we have Ryan back, so we'll hold off on the rest of the mailbags until afterwards. So Ryan, we're back. We previewed how this is kind of Separation Saturday a little bit, and of course, we normally kind of go chronological order, but there's two games out west that are later that I want to get to first because These are the two biggest games of the weekend for me. And the first one we're going to talk about is obviously relevant to Notre Dame, and that is the 8:00 Eastern game out in Pasadena between it's going to be on Fox. It's number 7 USC at number 16 UCLA. The Trojans are a 2.5-point favorite in this game, Ryan. There is a lot on the line for these two teams, and that have nothing to do with the rivalry. Obviously, the rivalry adds even more intrigue and flair to the game. But right now, you're talking about two football teams that have a chance to win the conference championship. Now, USC is the only team. USC is one of two teams. Well, actually, no, that's actually not accurate. USC does not necessarily control their own destiny based on, I got to go look at some of the tiebreakers and stuff, because if they lose to Notre, well, actually, yeah, they do, because they'd be 11-1. So I think USC right now, USC and Utah are the two teams that control their own destiny. If they both win out, they're both in. So UCLA has a shot as well. They're sitting there at 5-2. They're tied with Washington for 4th, but they're right behind Utah and Oregon, who are sitting there at 6-1. USC is tops at 7-1. So the Trojans can clinch a spot in the Pac-12 title with a win over UCLA today, or tomorrow, I should say, on Saturday. UCLA, on the other hand, Ryan, has a chance to keep their Pac-12 championship game with hopes alive. Remember that Pac-12 no longer has the North and South divisions. They're now just the Pac-12. So it's the top 2 teams overall that get in. So UCLA has a chance to, if they can beat USC, they're going to need a little bit of help, but they have a win over Utah. So if they beat USC and Utah gets beat by Oregon, I believe my understanding is that you'd see Oregon and UCLA in the conference championship game. So whereas Oregon beat UCLA, so then Oregon would have the tiebreaker over UCLA if that's kind of how it all plays out. So it's a little bit confusing because there could be a 3-way tie. But UCLA has a shot to not only end their rivals' chances at a Pac-12 title game, but to increase their own. So it's going to be quite fascinating, Ryan. So talk to me about this matchup in your view, and then kind of what your prediction was for this game, and then I'll give mine.
Well, I mean, if you joined us for the Tuesday night show where we talked a little bit about the top 25, the playoff ranking, and just kind of how we see each conference playing out the rest of the year, you would know where I'm going with this prediction in the simple fact of, Brian, honestly, I was looking at this game even last week because this is a big one, like USC, UCLA is a really nice rivalry. Both teams are notable this year, which has been kind of a change over the last couple of years. Both are good teams, and it means a lot, obviously, for the Pac-12 crown and potential playoff opportunity for USC if something shake out the right way. I think USC is going to win this football game, and it really comes down to me. I think that these teams are similar-ish in the sense they don't get to the same result offensively, but they are both very high-powered offenses. USC is much more of a pass. They have the air raid implementation, the spread option out of their offense, and they do a lot of things to spread you out, hit guys like Mario Williams and Jordan Addison, and let their athletes be athletes. UCLA does it a little differently. They're much more heavy reliant on the run. Zach Charbonnet, Dorian Thompson-Robinson as a dual threat option at quarterback. They get to their result a little differently, but they are both high-octane offenses. Defensively, I think both teams struggle at times. I think that UCLA has a decent pair of pass rushers in Latu and the Murphy twins, but secondary-wise, I think they aren't the best. I think, the back seven in general, I don't think is the best when we're talking about UCLA. And I think USC is just not a very talented defensive roster right now. So I think this is going to be a high-scoring affair. I ultimately went with USC because I believe that Caleb Williams has just been a little more consistent throughout his career than what Dorian Thompson-Robinson is. I know DTR has been much more consistent this season, but he's one of those players where I still kind of tread softly with him at times. I'm like, but is it going to rear its ugly head at some point where it's just a bad turnover in the wrong spot of a football game where it comes back to haunt you a little bit? So I'm going to go with USC, just a slightly more offensive firepower, slightly more trustworthy quarterback, in my opinion. I'll take Caleb Williams, USC 41-38 in a really competitive and exciting football game against UCLA.
Ryan, I struggled with this one.
Mm-hmm.
I struggle with this one all week, to be honest with you, because I think part of me just is kind of doing the reverse psychology thing. I really do. But I was surprised the whole staff picked USC. You picked USC 41-38. Vince picked USC 41-35. Sean Davis predicted them 45-40. Sean Stiers predicted 45-41. And Andrew McDonough predicted 45-42. Almost the exact score across the board. I predicted USC to win 37-31. And honestly, it just comes down to when I look at UCLA this year and I watch them play, I think they can give USC's defense a ton of problems and control the clock and eat up the clock and run the football. And I think, Dorian Thompson-Robinson can make enough plays to win the game. But the reason that I was really leaning towards UCLA all week. But the reason I ended up going with USC at the end, beyond just, the reverse psychology, and I'm just having some fun with that. That's not a real thing. But it just comes down to this. I watched UCLA's defense struggle big time with Jaden DeLoria. And you say, okay, it's just one game. It happens. True. Okay. But then I also saw them struggle with Bo Nix in a big way. I saw them struggle big time with that kid at Arizona State who just lit them up. This defense really struggles with good quarterbacks, especially good quarterbacks that are mobile. And with all due respect to those guys, none of them are Caleb Williams. And none of them are going to have the perimeter weapons that they have. And like somebody in the chat was like, hey, Mario Williams and Jordan Addison could both be out. My answer is okay. Like, I mean, they're so deep at receiver that it really, obviously it hurts it would affect the offense, but not enough to where I think it would, cost them the game. You still have Taj Washington, who's having a great year. He's got 30, well, not great year, but a good, really productive year because they spread the ball around really well. Jordan Addison's got 40 catches for 587 yards. Mario Williams has 26 for 493. Those are clearly good players. But Taj Washington's got 33 for 510. Brendan Rice has 26 for 336. Kyle Ford has 12 for 230. He had 2 huge plays last week. Austin Jones out of the backfield has 12 catches for 134 yards. Michael Jackson has 9 catches for 154, although I think he is out right now. I don't think he's playing now. He was out early in the year. And then you have Terrell Bynum, who's been a player for them. I think he's back after missing some time, middle of the season. Here's the thing. If you took away Jordan Addison and Mario Williams from this team at the beginning of the year, this is still a really good pass offense. That's the kind of depth that they have. So I just don't think it's going to affect them as much. And all those guys I just mentioned still are better receiving cores than the ones that have been giving them so many problems outside of Oregon. I say Oregon I like a lot. Oregon's Dante Thornton, Troy Franklin. That's a pretty good receiving core when you take away USC's 2 best. But then you look at the other side of the ball and say, look, they don't have better receivers than – I mean, Arizona State doesn't have better receivers than USC's backups, right? I mean, or Arizona does. And I love the McMillan kid as a freshman, but their receivers aren't necessarily better than the kids that USC is going to be trotting out there, even if Addison and Williams didn't play, period. Mm-hmm. Much less 100%. So I just have a hard time seeing that. I think the defense is going to have to bring its A game. And if they do, the key to this game is the defense. They're going to run the ball on USC. They're going to score on USC. The question is, can the defense make stops? And right now, if it comes down to it, in the fourth quarter of a close game, and it's Caleb Williams against Dorian Thompson-Robinson, I'm going with Caleb Williams until Dorian Thompson-Robinson proves me wrong. Because the big games that UCLA has won this year, Ryan, have not been games where he had to make plays in the fourth quarter at the end of the game. They've been games where they were out in front and just cruised. They controlled the game against Washington. They controlled the game against Utah. They put those teams away early. He had chances against Arizona to bring his team back, and he couldn't do it. And I just, it's the same thing I said last week when we were talking about Texas and TCU. Everything statistically, everything rankings, all this stuff, it's at Tech. Everything points to Texas should win this game. They were favored and all that stuff. But then at the end of the day, what I kept saying to myself was, but Texas hasn't shown me they can win this kind of game. And it's the same thing with UCLA and Dorian Thompson-Robinson. He hasn't shown me he can win this kind of game unless they get way out in front of a team. And I just don't think they're capable of doing that. But if they can, and they can force USC to play comeback ball, that's where UCLA could have some success. So the key for UCLA is going to be jump out early, get USC out of their desire to be balanced, force them to throw the football. Then you can design some stuff to maybe create some problems, because this USC offense can certainly USC offense can certainly get into some funks, and they're not the high-powered units that he had at Oklahoma. They're pretty good, but they're not that, in my opinion. Right. So that's going to be the key. But I'm going USC 37-31 for this one.
And you know what else is an interesting thing, Brian, is that UCLA, because I saw someone in the chat say that, UCLA can kind of wear down USC and control the clock. And I'm like, I get that. I get it, because Zach Charbonnet is a fantastic back. He's had a really productive year. But my thing is that they wore down Arizona technically too, right? I mean, Zach Charbonnet almost had 200 yards in that football game. They ran the ball very successfully against Arizona, and they still were not able to counteract defensively. I think the secondary and the pass defense, just for me, is too troubling. Like, it's even if you run the football well, I just don't think they have enough to contain Caleb Williams for a football game enough. Like, that's just where it comes down to it for me.
Their last 6 games, 345 passing against Washington. They gave up 287 to Utah. They gave up 283 to Oregon, 349 to Arizona State, and 312 to Arizona. The only exception to that was Stanford, who they only allowed 125 passing yards to. But Stanford has a completely different type of offense. A static quarterback that you know where he's going to be, and big, not overly fast wide receivers. That's not what's going to hurt UCLA. What's going to hurt UCLA is the speed that we've seen. The spread teams that spread them out and can go fast. And that's what USC is. So, to your point, Ryan, I mean, you're correct. That's exactly what they did to Arizona. They ran for 220 yards against Arizona and still lost, right? They ran for 402 yards against Arizona State and still gave up 36 points to Arizona State. They rushed for 186 yards against Oregon and still lost by 15. You know, so their defense is the issue. If their defense brings it Saturday, they will win. Because I don't think USC can stop the UCLA defense or offense. It's just that I just think that UCLA's offense is going to, or UCLA's defense is going to have a tougher time stopping this type of pass attack in this game. So we both got USC winning this game, Ryan. Well, let me ask you this before we move on. Let's talk about this from a Notre Dame standpoint. This is an interesting question that I want to look at. In your view, what is better for Notre Dame, to have USC kind of come in 10-1, ranked in the top 10, and then Notre Dame beats them? Or, because there's two ways to look at it. The other one is UCLA is a wounded animal, or USC is a wounded animal, and then Notre Dame puts them down, right? And so part of me says, well, seeing USC lose 2 games in a row down the stretch, and especially if they get smacked, sort of takes a lot of the shine off of USC season, which then helps with recruiting and some other things. But for Notre Dame specifically in 2022, it's the latter. So it's kind of like, do you look big picture? Do you look just this season, the macro versus micro thing? If your concern is this season, then I think the advantage is you want USC to win. If you're looking more big picture, I kind of think the idea of USC getting smacked this week and then Notre Dame smacking them next week might be the better option. So which one, Ryan, for you, do you think is your ideal scenario as you watch this game on Saturday night?
I'd rather USC come in with only 1 loss against Notre Dame. I do, because I think whether it's short term or long term, Brian, like I think it's massive for Notre Dame to say, not only in the short term, hey, we beat 2 of the better teams on our schedule, we're able to beat 2 top 10 teams during this season, and take another one that could potentially be in the playoffs down to the wire. Like, I think that that's a big step for your program, short term and long term. I think that really sells it to that, hey, even with USC and everything that they got going on and the excitement around that program, we could still go to Southern California and punch them in the mouth. I think that that is a big step for this program just in general. And I'm always a guy that, like, I would rather a team be the best version of themselves if I'm going to beat them, right? Like, I don't want them to have an excuse. Well, you know, you caught up to UCLA, to USC, and they're coming off a tough loss, and they're mentally not right in the game. Like, no, I want them to be at their peak. I want them to be confident, and I want Notre Dame to be able to come in against the best version of the team that they're playing and punch them in the mouth. Like, I don't want any asterisks next to the conversation or next to the game. So I think going in and being a 10-1 football team going into Notre Dame week, I would want to see USC as the best version of themselves so that there's no excuses when Notre Dame's able to take them down in Southern California.
So your focus is on this season more than the other, which is totally fine. I think they're both very valid ways to look at it. I just was curious which way you look at it. So for me, I always kind of root for USC to lose. But I also then like it when they win, because as you said, if Notre Dame beats them, it's it means more in this instance. But I wouldn't mind UCLA smacking them around a little bit, just to be completely honest with you. And then Notre Dame's the one that kind of puts them down at the end. Let's get back to our next prediction, Ryan. We're going to stay out west for the next big game. And the Pac-12 has 2 huge games this weekend. And arguably the biggest is not actually USC-UCLA. I would argue that the biggest is actually Oregon against Utah. Now, the UCLA-USC game has more college football playoff implications, because I'm someone who believes if USC wins out, they've got a really good shot at getting in the college football playoff. I know other people, or the national people, don't agree with that, but if you beat UCLA Notre Dame, and then either Utah or Oregon in the conference championship game, that's going to be a very strong resume for USC as they get ready to go into the postseason. So, but as far as just like the best game, which one has the biggest impact for potential, Pac-12 title games? I think this one is actually a little bit bigger than that one. Maybe that's just me as well, but Utah is number 10 in the country at 8-2. Oregon is also 8-2. They're number 12. They're coming off of a devastating home loss to Washington, which eliminated their college football playoff hopes. But they're still very much alive in the Pac-12 championship race, Ryan. They are, I believe, still in control of their own destiny. Oregon, if they win the next 2 weeks, they are in the conference championship game, because then there would only be them and USC as potential one-loss teams. Utah would have a second conference loss. Right now, they only have one. Oregon and Utah are both sitting there at 8-2, but they both only have one conference loss. They both have non-conference losses. Oregon obviously lost to Georgia, and Utah lost to Florida. So, Ryan, let's look at this game. It's obviously going to be it's one of those crazy night games. I don't understand why they continue to do this, but it's a 10:30 game. Number 10 Utah at number 12 Oregon. It's going to be in Outson Stadium. It's going to be an intriguing matchup. It's a new staff at Oregon. How will they handle the beatdowns? I mean, absolute beatdowns that Utah gave them last year twice, which was really an interesting thing, because Oregon last year under Cristobal was really ascending, and they were having a really good season, and they were getting a lot of hype, and I was talking about them too, because you looked at their only loss and could they be a playoff team, and people said, no, you can't. You lost to Stanford. But that was when, if you remember, Joe Moorhead got rushed to the hospital right before the game. And so they played that game without their offensive coordinator, and there was a lot of other extenuating circumstances. It was in early October. They were kind of rolling. They had beat Cal. They beat UCLA. They beat Colorado. They beat Washington. They beat Washington State. They were 9-1. They were ranked really high. They were playing a 3-loss Oregon team. They were number 3 in the country. They were playing a 3-loss Oregon State team, and they got absolutely destroyed, 38-7. 2 weeks later, Ryan, you're sitting there thinking to yourself, well, Oregon's going to get themselves some payback this week because of what happened in the college football playoff. There's no way that Oregon's going to be okay with that. There's no way they're not in the Pac-12 championship game. There's no way they're going to let Oregon do that to them again. They're going to be mad. They're going to be upset. They're going to be want this, going to want that. And they did it to them again. And Utah beat them. The score was almost identical. It was 38-7 the first time. The second game was 38-10. And just absolutely dominant performances in both games, Ryan. Utah ran for 208 yards the first game and just played bully ball. And then they ran for 191 in the second game. And they could have gone for even more if they didn't call off the dogs in the second half of both games. How does Oregon respond to last week's loss? How do they handle that? There's a lot of storylines that make this really a fascinating game, Ryan. You've got the oldest, I believe, the second most or most tenured coach in all of college football. It's either Kirk Ferentz. Kirk Ferentz the longest. Him and Kyle Whittingham are I believe, the two most tenured at their current school coaches in college football, versus the young buck and Dan Lanning. So there's just a ton of great storylines. So, Ryan, there it is, Oregon and Utah. I know where you're going with this, but what's your prediction? And then where are you in regard to how you see this game playing out?
The Pac-12 was so much fun this year, Brian. I think it is because you're seeing USC, UCLA be better than what they have been over the last few years. You're seeing Oregon, I think, outplay expectations when you compare the fact that, hey, they're bringing in a new coach and there's a new culture, and what's it going to look like in year one conversation with Dan Lanning, and how's that one going to land? And I really think that there's a lot of teams at the top of the Pac-12 that are just not separated by much. That's why I think almost every week you can see a team knock off the other. So this one was probably the toughest game we picked all week in this week's predictions. I almost went back and forth with this one probably 3 or 4 times. Ultimately, one thing that you talked about a little bit, I think Utah can play bully ball in this game. And I think that they can control the pace of this offense, because this is what I believe, is that Oregon's going to score some, right? They're going to have some plays where you mentioned Franklin and Bo Nix having a good year, and Irving, the running back has had a pretty good year for the most part. They have some weapons offensively where they're going to cause some issues for Utah when they're on defense. But I ultimately think that what Utah's been doing lately with Tavian Thomas at running back, he's really starting to get going down the stretch, being able to run the football. And I think that the passing game is just good enough. Like there's just not a lot of – Cam Rising's not a star, but he's a solid quarterback that doesn't usually shoot the team in the foot. Mm-hmm. Like he usually keeps you on script, and they're able to run the football pretty well, especially down the stretch here. So I'm going to say Utah controls the pace in this one. They beat Oregon in this one, and I really think that this is just going to kind of be a jockeying back and forth at the top of the Pac-12, a conference that is not separated by a ton up top. So give me Utah 28-27. I think this one is one where Utah gets an early lead. They're able to control the pace. Oregon comes storming back late because they have some weapons that are able to mount a comeback, but it just falls a little bit short in this one as Utah is able to run the football and come out with a 28-27 victory.
I'll tell you the part that surprised me. I fully expected you to pick Utah for just all the conversations we've had all year about. It's not a criticism. It's just I know your view on both teams, and I think I know you well enough to see that Utah, the higher ranked team, is going to win. That's not a shot or anything like that. It's just that's where I thought you would go. What I was surprised by, Ryan, and this is what I wanted to get you to follow up on, I was actually surprised that the score was down as much as it was, 28-27. Because if you look at some of the games that we've seen when Utah has played in some of these big conference games, and same with Oregon, that Utah, look at 42-32 against UCLA, 43-42 against USC. Those are their two big games. Oregon this year in their big games, it was 44-41 against Washington State, 45-30 against UCLA, and then 37-34 against Washington last week. Do you think there's going to be a little bit of sloppiness in the two offenses, or do you think the defenses for both teams are going to step up, and that's why you're seeing the game be more of a not that it's a 28-27 is a low-scoring game, but for these teams, I would say that it is a low-scoring game when you look at how they've both performed in these moments.
I think it's a mixture of everything. I think that there's going to be a little bit of sloppy play. I think the defenses are going to play better than they have for the majority of the season. But more than anything, Brian, I think for Utah to win this football game, they need to control the pace of this game. Because if they let it get to a point where it's a 40-something, 37 type of game, I think Oregon has the advantage in that one because I think they just have more firepower offensively, out wide especially. We talked about Troy Franklin, who I think is an excellent football player. If it gets too high scoring, I think Oregon comes out on top. But this is kind of the spot where I think Utah is going to feel comfortable in this game with their ability to run the football and control the clock a little bit.
So you're saying that because Utah is going to win, it's going to be because they've run the ball, the pass game is efficient, they're able to kind of keep that Oregon offense off the field. I got you.
100%.
Okay, makes total sense. I went a different direction on this. I have Oregon winning. I not only have Oregon winning, I have Oregon winning 41-31. I don't think this game is going to be as competitive. And part of it, Ryan, is I'm sort of banking on something from the last 2 weeks to be true. If I'm wrong, then Utah's going to win this game because if Utah plays like it did the last 2 weeks, they have looked really good the last 2 weeks in dominating. They beat Arizona 2 weeks ago, 45-20. They blew out Stanford last week, 42-7 in a game, Ryan, that wasn't at 42-7 at halftime. I don't think they scored a point in the second half. They just, in an attempt to not embarrass Stanford, it wasn't that they just played bad in the second half. They just look, we're not going to embarrass Stanford this way.
Calling off the dogs.
But, they could have scored 70 in that game easily if they wanted to. They did it with great rush. They pounded the ball. They absolutely pounded the football. They, you look at the success they had the last 2 weeks. They ran for 306 against Arizona. They ran for 279 against Stanford, 7.8 yards per carry. But if you look at before that, Ryan, not really since the Florida Southern Utah games has the ground attack really looked that good. And so as I kind of dig into the matchup a little bit, you say, okay, well, Arizona's rush defense is giving up 218.8 yards per game and 5.9 yards per rush. Mm-hmm. Arizona went for 306 and 5.7. Stanford's defense is giving up 222 yards a game and 6 yards a rush. Utah went for 279 and 7.8. So obviously they played two really bad rushing teams and two teams that are just not good at stopping the run. Oregon is giving up 108.2 rushing yards per game. Now, part of that is because they have played some teams in some of their big games that just don't run the football very well, right? The last three games, Washington, Colorado, and California, they've held them to 74, 120, 114 yards. Well, those teams don't run the ball very well. They held Washington State to 53 yards. They don't run the ball very well. But they also held Georgia to only 132 yards, partly because they couldn't stop Georgia from throwing the football. I mean, that helped too. But their run defense has been a very underrated aspect of this game. And so where I'm coming from, Ryan, is I think Utah's ground attack the last couple of weeks has been a little bit of fool's gold for me. That's where I'm kind of coming from. And if I'm wrong about that, then I think Utah wins. I think you're correct. Utah wins. The other part of it for me is I think that the loss to Washington last week was going to be a little bit of a smack in the face to Oregon. We've only seen Oregon really struggle twice this season, in my view, Ryan. And in both times, I thought they responded really well the next week. They got destroyed by Georgia in the opener and came out against a good FCS Eastern Washington team and put 70 on them. They struggled a little bit with Washington State, came out the next 2 weeks and had convincing wins over Stanford, Arizona, UCLA. They kind of went on a roll. I thought they made a dumb coaching move last week. I just still don't understand Dan Lanning's call to go for a fourth down with your backup quarterback. It didn't make a lot of sense to me. I don't think that cost them the game. It was the last thing that happened that cost them the game. I thought Washington just outplayed them in that game, to be honest with you. I thought Washington was a better team that game. I think they're going to respond. And the reason that I think Utah is going to have a little bit of trouble in this game, Ryan, is because I just don't have a lot of faith in the Utah defense. And you and I have talked about this a lot this year. This is not a vintage Utah defense. They're a little bit schizophrenic, in my opinion. The run defense some weeks looks good, other weeks not so good. But the pass defense is really what the problem is, which is kind of wild when you consider they have the best defensive back in the conference in Clark Phillips. I mean, I don't know if anyone's even in the conversation with him. Would you have anyone even in the conversation with him? It's the rest of it that's the problem.
Right. I mean, Clark has a great conversation to be in the best corner in college football this year, He's excellent, to your point. And it's interesting, man. I feel like one thing has to give in this football game, Brian. Like, I think that because you're right.
Let me just add this real quick to Ryan's point.
Yep.
Despite not getting targeted very often, Clark Phillips has 5 interceptions and 2 of which he's taken back for touchdowns. By the way, that's how, to Ryan's point, that's how good that kid's been this year.
Yeah. It's too bad he's too short. Too bad he's too short to play at Notre Dame. So
thanks, Coach Lee.
But I do think that the conversation that you made, and it's a great point about the rush offense for Utah. I'm buying into it being a trend, but you made a great point that has been against 2 not great rush defenses. So is that a situation where it is fool's gold, or is Utah just kind of settling in and offensive line is playing better and Tavion Thomas is starting to get downhill, or is it just the product of who you played on the schedule? So I do think that's the difference maker, though.
I think it's a little bit of both. You know what I mean, Ryan? And I just don't think they're going to run better than they had earlier in the year, like middle of the year, but they won't run nearly as well as they did the last 2 weeks. But the final piece to me, Ryan, as we're talking about like Clark Lee, he's brilliant, but the rest of the secondary to me is a major problem. And I mean, they have a really tough time stopping teams from throwing the football. They just do. I mean, UCLA. I mean, Dorian Thompson-Robinson ripped them up in that game. Look, Caleb Williams ripped them up. And now they forced a lot of incompletions in that game, more than normal for him, but they just hit big play after big play. I think that teams that have been able to beat them have been able to really rip them up in the passing game. Not beat them, play with them, have been able to beat them in the passing game. Even Florida was able to make some plays in the passing game. And Florida can't throw the ball at all. So that's where it came down to, I think. And then also the final piece is it's at Oregon. If it was at Utah, I'd probably pick a very similar score to what you predicted, Ryan. So I think it's the combination of those things. Oregon has a very good run defense. I think Oregon's balance on offense is going to give Utah's defense, which has been very shaky this year, it's a lot of problems. And then, of course, the home crowd's going to help them. So I went 41-31 Oregon. So that's the thing for me is if it comes down to it, who's got to make more plays? I'm going with Bo Nix over Cameron Rising because you said Cameron Rising won't get you beat, but he's a lot. He reminds me a lot of Ian Book. He won't get you beat, but he's not going to go win you that big game either. He's going to need a lot of help, and I just don't think the run game will be good enough to do that this week. That's where I'm coming from.
I will say I would love to go to an Oregon game. I think that this game is beautiful out there, man. It would be a fantastic game to go to.
Yeah, I would love to just one of these years just be like, Irish Breakdown's grown enough and we've got the Driscoll Media Empire rolling. I'm like, hey, you know what? You guys handle this season. I'm kind of taking the season off from being at games and I'm just going to get my RV, me and Ange and our dogs, and are just going to every weekend go to a different big game and just make sure that we hit up all the rivals. That'd be a lot of fun.
Driscoll's tailgate road trip. I love it.
There you go. Hey, that's a good idea. That's a good idea. I like that. All right. I can dig that. Next big game that we did a prediction for, Ryan, at Irish Breakdown was the matchup between the Oklahoma State Cowboys and the Oklahoma Sooners. That game is going to also be at night this weekend. It's a 7:30 game. It's going to be on ABC. The shocking part of this game, Ryan, is that Oklahoma is a 7.5-point favorite over Oklahoma State. Now, look, man, I get it. Oklahoma has struggled lately, right? Ever since Spencer Sanders went down in that Kansas State game, they have not looked as good. And honestly, Oklahoma State would be sitting there with 3 losses in a row if Spencer Sanders doesn't come off the bench last week and rally them to a win over Iowa State. Yep. So, they're sitting there at 7-3. They're back in the top 25. They travel to Norman. And here's a crazy statistic for you, Ryan. I kind of looked this little nugget up last night as I was making my prediction for this game. The last time that Oklahoma State beat Oklahoma in back-to-back games, Mike Gundy was the offensive coordinator for the Cowboys. It was 2001 and 2002. It's been a minute. So that's what's at stake because obviously Oklahoma State won last year. Oklahoma State is struggling, Ryan, but goodness gracious, have you watched Oklahoma play? They're coming off back-to-back losses to Baylor and West Virginia. So the spread really surprised me. That they were a 7.5-point favorite. So, Ryan, you and I clearly don't see it that way. Let's talk about this matchup. You actually see it even less that way than I do. Let's talk about your prediction and how we see this game playing out. And what do you think the reason is that the spread is the way that it is at this point? Is it just because of the fact that Oklahoma hasn't won back-to-back games so long? I'm having a hard time figuring this one out.
I think it's usually a combination of things, Brian. Like you said, the main reason that I am picking Oklahoma State in this game is because, like you said, Spencer Sanders came off the bench last week and started looking more like himself. And I think that he's going to be back more healthy than he's been in the last few weeks because he just hasn't, as soon as he got hurt, Oklahoma State just kind of went down the tubes, man. Like they're just not the same offense when they don't have Spencer Sanders. Because I will say this about Spencer Sanders. He has been a maddening quarterback throughout his entirety of his career, but he's been pretty good this year when he's healthy. He has. Yeah. He's had some really nice games. And I feel like he really was starting to turn the corner. And then, unfortunately, injuries have kind of derailed his senior season so far. But I think if he's back and he's healthy, I give Oklahoma State the edge. And it's more a combination of, hey, I think Spencer Sanders can give Oklahoma a lot of problems. I think defensively that team is a mess. But also, I'm just having a tough time thinking that Oklahoma's going to win this football game because I just think that they are just in a tough spot right now, man. Like I do. I think that they are reeling. I don't want to give them too much credit, but I thought that they were going to completely quit on Venables. I don't think they've completely quit, but I just think they're not a very good team. I think that they have been competitive in some football games, but I still don't think that I think that they are a wounded duck as far as a football team right now. In talent perspective, I think they lack in a lot of different spots that is not great. So as long as Spencer Sanders is healthy in this one, healthy enough, I have a 31-21 Oklahoma State. I think they get back on the right track after the victory last week. They start getting back in the proper direction that they looked like they were going early in the season. And I just am kind of not buying into Oklahoma in a big moments in their season right now.
No, Ryan, for me, I you said they've been in some of the games they've played, and that's true of the last two losses. They lost to Baylor by 3 in a close game. They lost to West Virginia by 3 in a close game. They had a lead in that game at one point in time.
Yep.
I don't think their first 3 losses to good teams are overly competitive. Baylor is scuffing a little bit, and West Virginia is not very good. And they lost to Kansas State by a touchdown, Ryan, but that game wasn't that close. It wasn't a one-touchdown game. They scored one touchdown late. I think they had 2. I'm looking at the box score now. I think they had a couple touchdowns in the fourth quarter. Yeah, they scored 14 points in the fourth quarter. It was a 34-20 game. Then Oklahoma scores, and Kansas State goes back on top. It was one of those games where the score never really, to me, was indicative of how much Kansas State was outplaying them. That's, it just Oklahoma was able to rip off a couple big plays against that Kansas State defense is really the difference. And, of course, they got blown out by Texas. They got blown out by TCU. And I think Oklahoma State is closer to those teams when Spencer Sanders plays than he is to West Virginia and Baylor. It's just when he plays. And that's kind of where it came down to for me. The only concerning part for me is the Oklahoma State defense. It is I don't know if I've ever seen a defense go from as good as they were last year to as bad as they are this year with mostly the same players. They didn't lose a ton of guys. They lost a couple secondary guys. They lost their Malcolm Rodriguez, a linebacker. Lost an interior, but Brock Martin's back, Colin Oliver's back. They have a couple of their starting DB. I mean, they went from really good top 10 defense to what they were for 20 years before that, which is a bad Big 12 defense. That's the only thing that gives me pause is that Oklahoma is going to be able to hit enough plays in this game because TCU can make stops, Texas can make stops, Kansas State can make stops. Oklahoma State's had a tougher time making stops, in my opinion, against good offenses. But is Oklahoma a really good offense at this point in time? That's the question, So I'm not buying this Oklahoma team. I'm shocked it's a 7.5 point favorite. They're a 7.5 point favorite, to be honest with you. And I think Oklahoma State's going to be able to rip them up. I just don't think they're going to be able to cover the Oklahoma State receivers. Oklahoma State's running game is not that great. That's one thing that could maybe be Oklahoma's saving grace. But as soon as they're going to win, they're going to have to start fast because this is a team that's on the brink, Ryan, in my opinion, of just quitting. And they've been here a couple times before, and Venables has been able to kind of walk them off the ledge after losing to – and that was after losing to good teams. After losing to Baylor and West Virginia in back-to-back games, this team is fragile. So they're going to have to come out early and get going. If they can get Dylan Gabriel going, get Eric Gray, because that's been the one bright spot for their offense this year has been Marvin Mims has been pretty good when the quarterback play has been okay. But, Eric Gray's had a really good year this year. He's already over 1,100 yards. He's a good football player. But, he carried them for a couple series against Texas when they do that Wildcat stuff. They just kept running Eric Gray, and Texas couldn't do anything about it, and then they stopped doing it. Then they tried to have Eric Gray throw a pass, right? And that kind of – isn't that when they threw the pick? It was stupid. But anyway, I just think that's their hope. They got to – if they start off hot early, I think they got a shot to win. But I picked 41-31, but I could see it being worse than that. Because part of me wanted to go like 41-24, 41-17, because I feel like if Oklahoma State jumps on them early, it's going to be a rout. But if it's a competitive game, I could see Oklahoma winning it late. They are the home team. It also means their offense is moving the ball. So that's where I was torn with this week, Ryan, is if I think it's going to be a close game, then I got to go with Oklahoma because that means they're playing to their potential. But if it's not a close game, I think, or if Oklahoma State wins, I think it'll be a more convincing victory. So, but I settled kind of somewhere in the middle and went 41-31 in this matchup. So that's going to do it for that game, Ryan. There's a couple other games. Now we're going to kind of go through just sort of early to later games that I want to talk about. Here is a couple games that I have heard people say are potential upset games, and I'm not sure. We're going to do a few potential upset games or upset watch teams this week. One of them I buy, one of them I don't. The first one is Illinois at Michigan. Illinois at Michigan. Sean Davis picked Illinois to win this game. I've heard some other people say that.
What a homer.
Ryan, I want to hear your stance on this. Personally, it's at Michigan. Illinois' offense is struggling. Brown is banged up. I just don't see the path to victory for Illinois in this game. Do you?
I don't either. It's Brian. I want to pick Illinois so bad. I really do because I love so much of defensively what that team has. I mean, you talk about Jerzon Newton up front with Keith Randolph and Sidney Brown and the secondary of Devin Witherspoon at corner. And I mean, Illinois literally has 3 secondary players that have been invited to the Senior Bowl this year. That defense is fantastic for Illinois. But you mentioned it already, right? Your best offensive player, bar none, in Brown, the running back, Chase Brown, is banged up and is, if he plays, I think he's going to be super limited. I don't even know if he's going to play. And their passing attack has just been very inconsistent this year. I mean, Tommy DeVito is just not a very good quarterback. And outside of Isaiah Williams, they don't have a ton of pass game weapons either to kind of go with him, right? So I just struggle because can Illinois hold Michigan's offense down a little bit? Sure, they can. They're a very talented defense. But to think that Illinois is going to be able to score enough against Michigan's defense, like that's where I'm struggling, man, because Michigan's defense, it's not as good as it was last year, but it's still a really good unit. And it's mostly because in this one, I just don't think that Illinois has enough playmakers and enough offensively to really challenge the Michigan defense. So I ultimately just don't think they're going to be able to score with Michigan. I think Michigan's going to be able to score a little bit more than they are. Is it going to be a lower scoring game? Possibly, because you're playing with 2 good defenses, but I just don't think Illinois is going to be able to score enough in this one.
Ryan, I'm there with you. The thing about J.J. McCarthy, he's a young quarterback. You could say, hey, maybe he makes some big mistakes that gives Illinois the ball. But Michigan doesn't put him in position to lose games. That's the thing. They haven't needed him to win they haven't needed him to win a single game this year, in my opinion. So they haven't put him in position to lose games. And I just don't see Illinois, to your point, I don't see Illinois with Tommy DeVito and Brown being banged up to be able to go in there and beat them. Because to your point, if the Illinois defense plays great and holds Michigan to 20 points, I still don't think Illinois can win the game. They have to not only keep Michigan, kind of under 20 to 24, but then also they got to create scores for themselves, whether it's getting short fields or whether it's getting scores directly. And I just don't think they're going to be able to do that at the Big House. I just don't. I don't think a one-dimensional team is beating Michigan unless that one-dimensional team can really throw the football. And that's the thing. And so I'm not in love with this Michigan team, but I think their whole thing of we haven't really played a team that's on our level continues on Saturday. I hope I'm wrong, but I think that's kind of where I'm at. And Archer, the Penn State game is not a good win. They're not that good. They haven't played anybody. They've only played 2 good teams all year, and they lost to both of them. He's just saying that because he needs to be a good win for Michigan so that it's a good win for Ohio State. But it's not a good win, so I don't see that one. The other another potential upset game, and this one I actually buy a little bit more. We're going to go out in the Big 12, and it's another noon game. So the Michigan game is going to be noon on ABC. The other noon game is on Fox. It is number 4 TCU at Baylor. This, Ryan, to me is – I've been on the TC bandwagon. You know that. I think they're a good team, but this is the one that honestly concerns me a little bit. They're going to smash Iowa State next week. We don't know who they're going to play in the Big 12 title game, so we'll see how that one goes. But as far as the regular season, if they win this weekend, they'll be undefeated when they go into the Big 12 title game. This is the game that concerns me a little bit because Baylor can play really good defense. Right? They're a little inconsistent, but they can play really good defense. And it's just, to me, this is the kind of matchup that this year has given TCU some problems at times. This type of team has given them problems at times. So TCU's only a 2.5-point favorite. That was the other thing. Now, here's the wrench. A week ago at this time, I'm looking at this game. I'm thinking this is a big time upset watch for me. Like, I'm really concerned about this game for TCU. Then I watched Kansas State absolutely obliterate Baylor on Saturday. And now I got to ask myself, where's the headspace at for Baylor? Do they come back kind of ticked off and that makes it even more upset, like kind of minded? Or is this a game where Baylor's just a little bit shook from last week and TCU has a chance to jump on them? That's going to be the interesting thing. And then, of course, there's we just beat Texas. We just beat these teams. Baylor, does TCU come in the right headspace? So the headspace for these two teams, Ryan, which it can get overplayed at times, but in this particular matchup, because of how the last week went for both teams, is something I'm very fascinated by. Does TCU come out, play their game, and roll, which I think they're capable of? And I think if TCU wins, I think they can win convincingly. Or does Baylor pull off the upset and Dave Aranda continues to just be a really good football coach?
We talked about this on Tuesday a little bit, Brian. I've been waiting for TCU to come back down to earth because I just think I thought for most of the season that this is just a really good coach getting the most out of his team, but I just wasn't sold that the talent level was to these heights. I'm not going to pick against TCU this time. And maybe I'm going to jinx them a little bit.
I was thinking it. You said it. Yeah, I was thinking it.
It might happen. But when I watch these two football teams, I know TCU didn't score a ton last week in their football game, but for the most part this year, they've had a really explosive offense. Max Duggan's had a really good year. Quentin Johnston has had some really big football games. Kendre Miller's been a really nice running back for them as well. I think that ultimately it's going to come down to TCU is going to be able to outscore a less than stellar offensive football team for Baylor. Do I think Baylor's going to hang tough on defensive side of the football for a little bit? Yeah, I do. But ultimately, I just don't think that the offense led by Blake Shapen is enough to counteract and to outscore TCU enough. So give me TCU in this football game. I'm not going to say I'm fully on the bandwagon, but I think that they may have a chance to go undefeated in this regular season, and we'll see what happens in the Big 12 championship and beyond.
Here's another interesting upset game that I just want to kind of throw at you and just kind of get your thoughts, Ryan. And It's not one that I'm predicting. Well, there's two, and they're both in the SEC. They're not necessarily games I'm predicting, but let's just say I have my eye on them. The first one, 7:00 on ESPN, Tennessee at South Carolina. Now, South Carolina and Tennessee are not really, Tennessee's a way better team. But here's where I'm looking at. South Carolina is a weird team that they have put a couple games together this year. We're like, hey, they looked pretty good in that game. They do have some players. The other part of it is South Carolina has a pretty good pass defense. Outside of the Georgia game, their pass defense has been really good this year. My second thought is Tennessee really a mature enough team to be up? They remind me of a much better version of Notre Dame. Okay, let me explain that. A much better version of Notre Dame because they're better than Notre Dame. But hear me out now. Tennessee's best games this year have been when they've played other really good teams. Obviously Georgia being an exception, but they look great against LSU. Their offense looked great against Bama. They've had some other games this year, Ryan, where they kind of sleptwalk through games, right? They needed overtime to go win at Pitt. They didn't look sharp early against Missouri. Ended up running away with them, but they don't have a very good defense. Didn't look great putting Florida away. So is this team mature enough to kind of feel like, hey, we've arrived. We've got two mediocre teams on our schedule, and we're just going to roll over them. And then South Carolina can jump them in the butt. So I'm very fascinated by this one. I'm not predicting it, but we've seen South Carolina do this before, Ryan. 2019, South Carolina, 4-8 football team on the season, and had one of the biggest upsets of the season that year, right? Do you remember which game I'm talking about? They were playing number 3 Georgia at home. South Carolina, again, not good. At the time, they were 2-3. They'd lost to North Carolina. They got blown out by Missouri. They got blown out by Alabama. They're coming off of a decent win over a Kentucky team that wasn't that good. And they come home. No, I'm sorry. It was at Georgia. They win 20-17. Now, that was a different Georgia team, but we've seen it before. So, again, just one that I'm going to kind of have my eye on as I'm watching better games. I'm going to kind of have my eye on to see that. And the thing about Spencer Rattler is he will have like a game a year where you're like, oh, that's why people ranked him as a 5-star. Hasn't really had that game yet this year. Does it come Saturday? I don't think it will, but there's just enough things lining up where I'm like, I'm at least going to have my eye on it. Ryan, what say you?
Well, I mean, I'm going to have my eye on it too because I think Tennessee could turn into a track meet. I don't see it, Brian. Like, I hope so.
Again, I don't see it.
Football.
Well, I don't see it. So I'm not predicting it.
Yeah.
But there's just enough ingredients there to say, let's see.
I definitely get that. I'm missing it with the South Carolina team a little bit. I mean, I think they were at 1 point 6-2 or 6-3. Like they were actually looking.
They were the top 25.
Yeah. Like they were looking okay at some points, and there is ingredients. I agree with you, right? Like I mean, just from a team structural perspective, they have a decent secondary. Cam Smith is a really good corner, very underrated football player. Zach Pickens is a really good defensive lineman. Jordan Bunch is a pretty talented football player, is a former pretty top recruit. Offensively, like you said, Spencer Rattler has all the tools in the world, just hasn't put it together consistently at all. Marshawn Lloyd's a talented back. They have Jaheim Bell at tight end, Austin Stogner, former Oklahoma transfer that came over with Spencer Rattler. So there are tools there, right? There are some players that to get excited about. There's no doubt about it. I personally do think that this Tennessee team is mature enough, though. I do. Mm-hmm. I think that you have a sixth-year senior quarterback. You have a pretty experienced offensive line. You have some guys on defense on the second and third levels that have played a lot of football. You have a pair of defensive ends that are both juniors and a redshirt senior, and Byron Young and Tyler Barron. So these guys have been around the block. Now, they haven't experienced success to the degree that they've had this year. So that, again, it's a legitimate question to put out there. Will they be able to handle success? I think that they have done a nice job throughout, coming off of that Georgia loss in handling their business, last week especially. So I think that they can maintain the momentum. They keep it rolling here. I just don't think that South Carolina is going to have the firepower to outscore or even entertain outscoring a very talented Tennessee team.
Yep.
And it's senior day, I believe, for Tennessee, if I remember correctly.
No, Tennessee's senior day was last week. It's at South Carolina. Yeah, Tennessee's on the road the next two games. Yeah, Tennessee's at South Carolina this week, at Vandy next week. Their senior day was last week. It is senior day for South Carolina because their last game's at Clemson. Mm-hmm. So, to your point, Ryan, they started off 1-2, lost to Arkansas and Georgia, then won their next 4 games, blew out Charlotte, blew out South Carolina State, beat Kentucky by 10 on the road when Kentucky was ranked, beat Texas A&M, and then they drop a home game to Missouri. Then the next week they go out and beat Vanderbilt on the road and then come back and go down to Gainesville and get smashed by Florida last week. So they're just not they're not that team, but they show enough flashes and there's enough ingredients to say, I'm going to keep my eye on this one. Here's another game I'm going to have my eye on, Ryan. And I'm not predicting it, but it's just one of those games to keep an eye on and that is I'm just going to come out with it. It's going to be a 9:00 game on ESPN2. It's UAB at LSU. LSU has clinched the Western Crown. They have, let's just say LSU has had a tendency this year to at times play down a little bit to their competition, right? Mm-hmm. Similarly to Notre Dame. And you talk about how they played against Florida State. They didn't play that great against Auburn. They played horrible against Arkansas last week. And I would argue with all the injuries Arkansas is dealing with right now, that UAB's not much different than Arkansas is right now, except for one exception. They have a little bit more experience at quarterback right now than what Arkansas was putting on the field last week. And here's the other thing: UAB can really run the football. They can really run the football.
Dwayne McBride's a good player. The running back is a good football player.
Yeah, and he's got 1,400 yards this year, Ryan. It's 6.9 per carry, 70 touchdowns. Their number 2 running back, Jermaine Brown, has 689 yards and 6 yards a carry. And then their quarterbacks have combined, Dylan Hopkins and Jacob Zeno have combined for over 200 rushing yards. So you're talking about a team that at times this year has looked really dangerous, has looked really good, and at times this year has just looked kind of like, dude, how did you lose that game? Right? That's kind of the weird thing about them. But, last week they had a very convincing win over North Texas. They've had wins this season over Georgia Southern. Middle Tennessee, they blew out Middle Tennessee, blew out Charlotte, who stinks. And of course, this last week, North Texas, but they also lost a really close game to UTSA, lost a really close game to Florida Atlantic, lost a really close game to Western Kentucky, and the worst loss they've had this year was a really close loss to Rice. They have not had a loss by more than 7 points this year. They've lost by 7, 4, 3, 7, and 6. Their wins have been by 59, 14, 27, 14, and 20. So, and of course, they're dealing with their head coach had to step away in the offseason. That was this offseason, correct? When Bill Clark stepped away, I believe.
Coach Clark, yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of where we're at. So that's a game to me is on my mind because this is an LSU team that has shown a little bit of, I say, immaturity at times, this year. And the other thing too is, Ryan, this is an LSU team that can be run on, in my opinion.
Yes.
And that's a big component to this. They've allowed over 200 rushing yards 3 times this year. And the last couple teams that didn't run on them because they don't really run the ball well. But I felt the same way going into the Ole Miss game. And they did a great job against Ole Miss's run game. So perhaps they've turned the corner since the middle of the season they're getting run on. That's a game that I've got my eye on too, Ryan, just to kind of see. And it's not even that LSU might lose. My question is, if LSU struggles against UAB, how does their non-conference start to maybe affect how they're viewed? Like, let's say they beat UAB by 7 to 10 points in a game they have to pull away late. You say, okay, so you lost a non-conference game to a middle-of-the-road, middle-of-the-pack SEC or ACC team. You played a Sun Belt team who was 5-5, 6-5, or 5-5, and you didn't really run them off the field, right? So I could see where even if they don't blow them out, if it's a close game, even if they win, that could start to have an impact. If let's say Clemson wins out or USC wins out, even if LSU is able to beat Georgia in the SEC title game, an 11-2 SEC champ that kind of was not very good out of conference. Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. So anyway, that's another game that's kind of on the back of my mind, Ryan.
That's like a pesky team too, UAB, right? Because you mentioned the ability to run the football can always keep you in a football game, right? Like ultimately, I'm not going to pick UAB to pull that upset, but they could keep it close. I think they can for a while at least until LSU has to pull away at the ends. So, I mean, I'll obviously be rooting for UAB. I'll be a big Blazer fan during that football game. There's no doubt about it. And I'll be hoping for Dwayne McBride to have the game of his life and parlay that into NFL draft buzz because I know he's getting a little bit of buzz. Great note, though, Brian. Great note that I want to end this conversation on. It's completely random, but you know how my mind works sometimes, okay? Jacob Zeno, who was at Baylor originally, he was over there.
I like this high school film a lot, by the way.
Yeah, he's got a real talented arm, man. He's got a live arm. So you know how programs like to kind of fluff the measurables up a little bit, right? This guy's a little bigger than they are. When Jacob Zeno was at Baylor, he was listed at 6'1". If you go to his profile now on UAB, he's listed at 6'4", which is fantastic. They gave my man an extra 3 inches.
So I think, Ryan, he was listed at 6'4" on his coming out of high. Yes, he was listed at 6'4" coming out of high school too. So yeah, that's kind of funny. So they're giving him his recruiting size again, right?
Yes.
And then Baylor put him at his real size. That's really funny.
Just an extra 3 inches. No big deal.
Yeah. Yeah. He does look taller than 6'1" to me, but he doesn't look 6'4" by any stretch.
No, he's definitely not 6'4".
At all. Exactly. At all. So that's
I posted that in the offseason. That was the funniest thing, though. Literally on Baylor, it's like 6'1" Jacob Zeno, and then in one offseason, he's now 6'4" UAB star Jacob Zeno, which is fantastic.
I love it. I love it. Let's work through a couple quick games here real quick, Ryan. I just want to kind of do sort of a rapid fire on this, a little different rapid fire than what the other guys do, but we're going to do a little bit of a quick rapid fire just to get some thoughts on a couple games and how you see some things playing out. Wisconsin at Nebraska, big game from Wisconsin. You're 5-5. Your last 2 games, you play at Nebraska and home against Minnesota. You got to win one to get into a bowl game, right? And I think that this is also Jim Leonhard coaching for his chance to be the head football coach. Nebraska, do they pack it in or and lose 10-point underdogs at home, or do they kind of come out and say, hey, we're going to give one last one last shot to try to maybe pick off a big win this year, or because again, this is senior day for Nebraska, last home game of the year. What say you, Ryan?
I think it's going to be a close football game. I would still pick Wisconsin, but I think one thing that you mentioned is the senior day implications, right? Like I do think that Nebraska has some seniors on that football team like Garrett Nelson and O'Shawn Mathis that are going to be ready to play. Like they're going to be proud football players and want to end their season off right. I think Wisconsin ultimately does win this game because I'm still high on Braylon Allen and everything that he can do running the football. So give me Wisconsin, but I do think that Nebraska's going to cover that 10 points. That just feels like a lot to this Wisconsin team that is very, very inconsistent throwing the football.
Well, we've talked about how the computers in Vegas view Wisconsin every year. It's like I scratch my head at some of the spreads, like the Michigan State one. Remember that? We said that week, like not only did I not think they were going to win by that much, they weren't even going to win. I picked Michigan State to win that game. I think you did as well.
I think, Brian, that they think that Graham Mertz that played his first ever football game against Illinois is still the Graham Mertz that we see today, and that he's going to do that every single game, right? Like they just give him too much. And that's where this offense falls apart, is that they're always going to be able to run the football because they always have some talent up front. They have Braylon Allen, who's an absolute freak show at running back, but the quarterback position has just been a big, big inconsistency for them over the last few years. And I think that Graham Mertz just isn't that good. So I think that he's going to keep Nebraska, or this passing offense is going to keep Nebraska in the football game, but I ultimately do think that Wisconsin's just a little more talented than what Nebraska is right now.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's go to some more. I agree with you on that. Here's another very interesting game that I was hinting at before when you had to step out. Duke at 7-3 goes to Pittsburgh this weekend, who's 6-4. Fascinating story. Pitt is a touchdown favorite over Duke. The Blue Devils have won 4 games in a row. Duke's 3 losses this year, Ryan, are by a combined 14 points. They lost by 8 at Kansas, lost by 3 at home against North Carolina, lost by 3 in overtime against Georgia Tech. They've won 3 in a row, blew out Miami, beat BC on the road by a touchdown, and beat Virginia Tech last week by 17. Pitt, on the other hand, Ryan, is coming off of 2 good wins in a row. Beat Syracuse 2 weeks ago, blew Virginia out last week in a very impressive game, which helped them overcome back-to-back losses to Louisville and North Carolina. So, going into this game, Duke has a lot to play for. They have Pitt on the road this week, home against Wake Forest next week. There's a legitimate chance for Mike Elko to go 9-3 in his first year at Duke. I think even if he can just win one of the next 2, 8-4 is a heck of a turnaround and looks a whole lot different than 7-5. I know that may seem crazy because it's just one game, but it just looks different. Can Duke go on the road with Riley Leonard and the team that Mike Elko has put together and beat Pitt at Pitt? I'm predicting actually an upset in this game. This is going to be my upset pick of the week, which is a team's got to be more than a 6-point underdog or beat a ranked team. Pitt being a 7-point underdog. This is my upset pick, Ryan. I'm taking Duke over Pitt. What say you, Mr. Roberts?
I was going to say the same exact thing. I think that this is a big upset pick. I think it's a big opportunity for Duke because I think that there was a couple layers to this football game. One, Pitt offensively has turned into a very one-dimensional football team. Israel Abakinda is a really good running back. There's no doubt. But with Keaton Slovis being banged up and just inconsistent and that passing game just not doing very well, I think that this is a defense for Mike Elko with Shaka Hayward and Dwayne Carter and some good players up the middle, where I think that they're going to be able to do enough to slow down Israel Abakinda to a degree and try to force Pitt to throwing the football. And then on the other side, man, I think the world of Riley Leonard. Like, I think that kid is just going to be a really, really good football player in the future. And I think that he's already shown the flashes of how good he can be this year. So I'm going to take Duke in this one because I think that we're going to be able to do enough to make a one-dimensional Pitt team have to beat them through the air. So I'm going to take the better quarterback of how they're playing right now. Give me Riley Leonard, Duke in the upset. Their defense, I think, plays a big part in this one.
I dig it. So we're on the same page. Here's an interesting game. Number 15, Kansas State at West Virginia. Both teams had huge wins last week. Obviously, their seasons have gone very different. Kansas State needed that game last week, Ryan. I thought they were going to lose. I thought they were going to drop to 6-4. A lot of the shine from how good of a season they were going to have was going to be gone. I did not think they were going to go on the road and beat Baylor. Baylor had been playing good football. Baylor was starting to get hot, and they destroyed Baylor 31-3. I mean, just outplayed them from the jump and forced some turnovers of Baylor, and just really Baylor could never get anything going offensively. Now they go back on the road to West Virginia, a team that was reeling, Ryan. They had lost 3 in a row, had lost 4 of 5. They lost to Texas by 18, beat Baylor by a field goal in a great game. I don't know if you watched that game, Ryan, but I should say it was a great fourth quarter, more so than it was a great game. Then got blown out by Texas Tech 48-10, lost by 10 to TCU, got beat by Iowa State by 17. Iowa State by 17. It's not a good Iowa State football team. And then what did they do last week? At home, they beat Oklahoma 23-20. It's senior day in Morgantown this weekend. JT Daniels getting his last chance to play at home. Can the Mountaineers pull off a second straight win with Neil Brown's job on the line, or was last week an anomaly against a team that's just simply not very good, and K-State keeps rolling? What do you say there, Mr. Roberts? And K-State, by the way, is a 7.5-point favorite.
Yeah, I think it was an anomaly a little bit for West Virginia. I just think that they've had a couple outlier victories where you're just like, it worked that day. And could it happen again? It's always possible. But I just Kansas State, I think, is just a better football team. I just do. I just think they're more talented. I think that what you're talking about offensively with guys like Deuce Vaughn, and now even if Adrian Martinez is still banged up, Will Howard is now turned into
they're good at quarterback no matter who plays. That's one difference about this team, Ryan. Let me interrupt you real quick and let you get back on it. In the past, like when they lost Skylar Thompson, they were done.
Yeah, it was over.
Chris Kleiman's had some really good football teams that were they were limited at quarterback behind the starter. And when Skylar Thompson went down in 2 different years, they just went off a cliff. This team has shown, because of getting the portal kid and then developing Will Howard, that it doesn't matter who they put a quarterback. They've been a pretty good football team this year. And so that's a positive sign for him. That's not like it was in the past, Ryan. So to your point, it really doesn't matter who they play quarterback. This team has shown the ability to win football games. So please continue with the matchup, because we're on the same page on this one.
Yeah, and I was going to say, Brian, is that I actually think that they've been a more balanced football team when Will Howard's been out there, because he can throw the football a little more consistently than Adrian Martinez. He's not quite the dynamic athlete that Martinez is, but there is something to be said about the balanced attack. But I think ultimately Deuce Vaughn, Felix Anaduke Uzama as a pass rusher, Khalil Duke's a really talented player as well. Julius Brents, their corner, who's like 6'4", just got invited to the Senior Bowl. They just have more dudes, I think, than West Virginia ultimately. So West Virginia is always a threat to score some points, because they're just they're a very bipolar team, right? Like one week they look okay offensively, the next they look inept. And so they might be able to score a little bit. But, I mean, this Kansas State team, I think, is starting to plateau and play their best level of football. And I just think they just have too many dudes for West Virginia.
Okay, here's the next question, Ryan. We know Georgia's going to beat Kentucky. Right. We both agree with that. Here's my question, though, because Kentucky plays a decent defense, and this is a little bit of Georgia's got 2 week games coming up. I imagine Georgia's going to kind of get a lead and start resting some guys the next couple weeks is my prediction. So my question would be, does Georgia cover the 22.5 spread at Kentucky?
I think they do. 22.5 is a lot of points, but I think they cover. And it's mostly because, honestly, Brian, Kentucky's been a good running team since Chris Rodriguez got back. I mean, Chris Rodriguez is a really good running back for them. It's a really good college back. But what gives me worry in this game is that, I thought Will Levis was going to put together a nice season after showing flashes last year. But he started out okay, and then he just fell off a cliff, man. And he has just not been good down the stretch here. So I think anytime you have a one-dimensional offense going against that talented of a Georgia defense, I just don't think Kentucky's going to be able to score enough. And again, Kentucky plays a nice brand of defense. They got guys like Jordan Wright as a pass rusher and J.J. Weaver, some talent on that defensive side of the football. But ultimately, I just don't think that Kentucky's going to be able to score enough. So give me Georgia to cover, unfortunately, in that one.
I said it this summer. I did not get the Will Levis hype. I thought he was a product of Liam Cohen's system. When he left, I had a feeling that the offense would get bad. It would not be as good. I didn't think it'd be this bad. I'll be honest with you.
It's bad right now.
Here's the shocker. They went 4-0 without Chris Rodriguez. Since he's been back, they are 2-4. Now, I'm not blaming him. I mean,
No.
that kind of jumped into your SEC part of your schedule, right? I mean, that, they beat Miami of Ohio, Youngstown State, Northern Illinois, but they did beat Florida at Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And they have gone 2-4 with wins over Mississippi State and Missouri, and then losses to Ole Miss in a competitive loss, South Carolina at home, blown out by Tennessee, and then last week lost at home to Vanderbilt. Yes, I agree. I think Georgia will cover, but I think that I could see Kentucky sneaking in a score to get under late, because I do think Georgia will get a big lead and then rest guys these next couple weeks. That's my
Nice.
prediction on that.
That's a nice victory last week for Clark Lee, by the way. Good for him.
Yeah, big time. Good guy. I like Coach Lee. Didn't always agree with his recruiting decisions, but a good man, in my opinion. Here's another one, Ryan. Miami at Clemson. Clemson is up 19. Now, this isn't a prediction of the game, but I think this is an important game for Clemson for two reasons. Number one is Miami's recruiting very well, partly because NIL. You need to beat them so bad that kids are like, do you want to make – yeah, you can go there and make money, but you're going to get embarrassed and play for a garbage program. That's number one. Number two, Clemson needs to blow out their next two opponents in order to get a little bit more respect. They're not getting enough respect from the committee right now for me. Clemson, because the ACC is not getting enough respect from the committee right now. And so to me, this is one of those games where Clemson's got to come out and dominate. They're 19-point favorites. Does Clemson have enough offense to do it, or maybe plus a combination of, is Miami ready to quit? Because after what Cristobal said this week, there's a bunch of parents that were tweeting negative things about the coaching and all that stuff, and he said, "Hey, you're more than welcome to come pick up your kids, right? If you don't like it, you're more than welcome to come pick them up." It's going to be one of two things is going to happen. Miami either responds well to it and they come out playing inspired football, or B, they're going to fold and Clemson's going to destroy them. And with this Miami team, I have no clue which one of those two things it's going to be. But I will say this is a game where, not looking at upset or whatever else, Clemson has to dominate this football game if they're going to continue to kind of catch people's attention going down the stretch. Good win against Louisville last week, but you're up 31-10. You missed a chance to really put Louisville away. You let the game be not as big of a blowout as it really was. They can't make that same mistake against Miami.
Did you say that was 18? Was the spread of that game?
19.
Oh, man. 19 is so big for that Clemson offense. That is a big spread.
Yeah. And it's a 47.5 over under. So basically what they're saying is there's not going to be a lot of scoring, but Miami's not scoring on this Clemson defense.
Which is probably safe to say with what we've seen offensively from Miami over the last few weeks. Brian, I mean, if you ask me which one's more likely, I would say that more likely Miami packs it in, I guess. I mean, I guess I would take Clemson to cover, but I wouldn't feel great about it. But it's just I haven't seen any life out of this Miami team. Like, I haven't seen it. I mean, there's just been this weird carousel of quarterback with Van Dyke and Jake Garcia, and then Jakari Brown, I think, is the third stringer's name that's been playing.
Well, he's the starter now. I mean, he's a true freshman who really can't throw right now. Like, they're going to throw. What they're going to do to him on Saturday is a lot like what I felt Georgia did to Anthony Richardson Florida did to Anthony Richardson last year by giving him his first career start against Georgia.
Throw him to the dogs.
But at least then Anthony Richardson was in his second year. This kid's a true freshman who's got tons of tools, but he's not a quarterback right now. Like, at first they were putting him in as just kind of being a wildcat type of quarterback, but now they're letting him be the quarterback. It's very strange, and I think if they do that, Clemson will dominate. I think this game.
Yeah, I think you're correct, because Miami was actually running the ball okay early in the season with the Parrish kid, but that has kind of stopped. The offensive line isn't playing very well. I mean, offensive side of the football for Miami, it's just been ugly, man. Like, it has not been good at all. Defensively, they've been okay in spurts, but it's just not great offensively. So if I had to pick, I would pick Clemson as cover, because I was high, and I'm still kind of high on the Mario Cristobal thing in Miami. Like, I thought that he was a good fit for that program and he would be able to recruit at a high level. But right now, I just don't see any life from that Miami team. So I kind of think they pack it in this week. I really do.
Ryan, I think he needed to say what he said. I think it's almost good for him if a bunch of those kids leave, honestly. And I know it's going to put the program off a little bit, but it's like, get those kids out, let them leave, and we'll go get a bunch of portal kids that we can handpick. We'll sign as big of a recruiting class as we can get, and then that's how you can quickly, get your culture changed. Because the problem is when you bring in 25 new players into a culture of 50 dudes that's broken, there's a greater chance that the new kids get more adopted into the old culture than the other way around. But if you can bring in like 40 new kids, let's say 28 recruiting and then like 12 to 13, 40, 41 do transfers. Now all of a sudden you brought in a whole new fresh of blood, and now you've let them kids know this is what you're coming into. This is what we need you to do. So I kind of liked what he did, to be honest with you. I kind of liked that he called them out and said, hey, you want to be here, leave. Right. I think the first year one is the best time to do that. If you say that in year three, it's like coach is panicking, but when you say that in year one, it's kind of like, okay, he's trying to change something. Right. Yeah. And I was smart. It was smart in my opinion. So, but I don't think the player's going to respond well to it.
No, I don't think so either.
I don't. Which is kind of bad, but good, honestly.
But you're correct that it is it's a necessary evil that needs to happen, though, right? If players have not bought into it and they're going to oppose it so much, you have to get rid of that, right? Because even if it's talented football players, if they're not bought into the vision of what you're trying to build, then it's counterproductive to you. So I agree completely to that sense.
Couple more here, Ryan. We're going to kind of quickly work through Texas at Kansas. This is a very interesting game for me, Ryan, because Texas is how did they handle last week, right? And Kansas is reeling. They've won one of their last 4 games. Their only win was a 21-point win over Oklahoma State. They have shown that they are a much better team at home this year than they are on the road, at least since their quarterback Daniels got hurt. I believe he's still out, right?
I believe he is.
And the kid that's starting now is an athletic kid, but he was the kid that was there last year when they weren't very good because he's just not as good as Daniels is, right? Right. But Texas is a bit of a strange team, Ryan. I'm curious about how their mental state is this week after the loss to TCU last week. So does Kansas have any shot to upset the Longhorns? Kansas is a 9-point home dog, Ryan. I don't think they have enough firepower to do it. I think the quarterback being gone is an issue. This is more about this will be a game if Texas doesn't come with the right mindset. That's more of what my question is for you.
I think this is a gut check time for Texas because what are they now? They're 6-4, right? Like they've been extremely up and down, and I think that you are starting to be a little worried about Quinn Ewers. Like he hasn't been the same since he came back from that injury, and he just hasn't looked because early in the year going into that Alabama game, he was kind of trending upward. Like there was a lot of exponential growth, and since he's come back, I feel like it's kind of been falling to the wayside a little bit. So I think this is a little bit of a gut check for this Texas team, this Texas offense, especially led by Quinn Ewers. So I think that ultimately Texas gets back on the right track. I don't know if I would say that it's going to be a substantial victory where it's just like start to finish, you dominate the football game. Because I do think this Kansas team is tough. I do. I think that they play a hard brand of football. I just think Texas is more talented at the end of the day. So I say that Quinn starts going back in the right direction. Texas gets a victory. But I say that Kansas is probably a pesky team and sticks around for a little bit, but talent wins out for me.
These next 2 games are going to be huge for Texas, Ryan. You're talking about a team that went 5-7 last year and lost, 6 of their last 7 games. And this year's team started off well, close loss to Bama, Texas Tech without their starter. Then they won 3 in a row, beat West Virginia, smashed Oklahoma, beat Iowa State. Then they lost to Oklahoma State, and it looked like they had kind of recovered. They went on the road, beat Kansas State in an impressive game, but last week they got thoroughly outplayed by TCU. TCU missed a lot of chances to turn that game into a blowout. They really did. Now you say, okay, where's Texas? Are you going to kind of go 1-2 the last couple games, go 7-5, which honestly isn't a huge improvement from last year to me. Honestly, it's really not. Or can you rally and win your last 2? Because 8-4 after 5-7, when you can point to a 1-point loss to Bama, a touchdown loss on the road to Oklahoma State, a touchdown loss to a team that could be in the college football playoff, and you've got road wins over Kansas State, you blow out Oklahoma. There's enough in there at 8-4 for Texas to say, we're starting to turn the corner. We really are. And so I do think these next two games are big for Texas in their future. Gives them some really good momentum going into the offseason, which they need to finish this recruiting class off well. They're trying to flip some kids here down the stretch. So I do think that finishing strong is going to be very important for the Longhorns. And it's going to tell us they've learned how to win football games. I think that's a very important thing. We're going to roll through a few more here, Ryan. Here's an 8:00 game that I'm very interested in. Syracuse at Wake Forest. This is two really struggling football teams. I think Wake Forest is going to I just can't get a read on Wake Forest. This is like the third week in a row I kind of thought they were going to kind of turn it around, or this will be the third week in a row. I thought they were going to bounce back against NC State. They didn't. I predicted them to beat North Carolina at home last week. They didn't. Syracuse is – I mean, these are two teams headed in bad directions, right? Wake has lost 3 in a row. Syracuse has lost 4 in a row. And they got absolutely humiliated. They were at least competitive against Clemson and Notre Dame. They got humiliated last week by Syracuse, 38-3, and it could have been way worse. Which team gets back on track in this weekend? I'm going Wake Forest, Ryan. What say you in this game?
I'm going Wake Forest as well. I think Syracuse, the injuries have just caught up to them, man. Like I really do. Garrett Schrader getting banged up, and then Garrett Williams getting injured in the Notre Dame game for a guy that's a real vocal leader for them and a big backbone of their defense. I feel like we have now seen that Syracuse has some guys up top. You know, we talked about the Mikel Joneses, the Garrett Williams, the Sean Tuckers. That top echelon of players for Syracuse are really nice. But the more injuries that they sustain, I think you just kind of see that there is depth issues still on that team, right? So I think that Wake Forest is just the more healthy team comparative to Syracuse right now. So give me the more healthy team, although both are heading in a bad direction, like you said. I just think that Wake Forest is going to be able to score a little bit on Syracuse. So give me Wake Forest, just a slightly more healthy team.
And I think the Syracuse was a little bit smoke and mirrors early. I think their offensive coordinator is a pretty good football coach. And to your point, I think teams have kind of figured it out, and their quarterback play is back to where it was last year, in my opinion. That's basically what we've seen. And so that's kind of been the reason why they've struggled. And he's kind of doing what he did. I like Robin Anae as an offensive coordinator in some ways. I think he does some good stuff throwing the football. But his utter unwillingness to try to establish a ground game is mind-boggling to me. Mind-boggling. You've got a massive offensive line. You've got one of the best running backs in college football, and you've now gone 3 straight games with under 100 yards rushing. Like, okay, that's not good.
It's not
good.
No,
it's not good. All right, let's get to – so we got to wrap – Brandon just kind of threw this up there. Brandon Plesner says he wants to kind of get quick thoughts and picks, Ryan. So let's work through a couple of these real quick, and then we'll get to these. Ole Miss, Arkansas, Ryan. Ole Miss, obviously number 14 team in the country. Arkansas is reeling quite a bit. Another team that kind of came into this year with some expectations, Ryan. They have not been able to kind of to play to the level people thought. They were in the top 10 at one point in time this year, Ryan, and they are now 5-5 and have lost 2 in a row to Liberty and LSU. They're home senior day against Ole Miss. Ole Miss is coming off of a heartbreaking loss to Bama. How does this one play out, Ryan? I got Ole Miss. What say you?
I got Ole Miss as well. I think it could be a competitive football game if KJ Jefferson is playing, but I think if he's not, I just not a believer in Malik Hornsby and Cade Fortin or whatever the third string quarterback for them. So I just think that the quarterback play falls off a cliff when KJ doesn't play. So give me Ole Miss in that one.
All right, Ryan. Next game that he wants to talk about is Texas Tech at Iowa State. Texas Tech had lost 2 games in a row, lost to Baylor in a blowout, battled TCU, but ended up falling short in a game they were never really in. Bounced back last week with a convincing home win over Kansas, 43-28. Iowa State is losers of 6 of their last 7. They had lost 5 in a row before beating West Virginia, 31-14 at home. Went on the road last week. Was beating Oklahoma State until Spencer Sanders came in the game and rallied them to the victory. Now they are at home for senior day against Texas Tech, Ryan. The Red Raiders under Joey McGuire are 5-5, and they're 3.5-point road dogs against Iowa State. Now, here's the interesting thing, Ryan. Iowa State has Texas Tech at home this week and at TCU next week. Lose one, and there's most likely no postseason because they're 5-7. And then Texas Tech is in a similar boat. They're at Iowa State this week and then home against Oklahoma next week. Both of these teams enter sort of a must-win situation going into this weekend if they want to qualify for a bowl game.
Give me Iowa State. They're the home team, senior day. I think that they at least play very good defense on the Iowa State side of things. Texas Tech is just too up and down for me. I like some of the things that Coach McGuire is doing, but I just can't get a pulse on them on a week-to-week basis. So I'll take Iowa State in a tough one, mostly because they're at home.
I'm going Texas Tech. I do not like Iowa State. I think the West Virginia win was a mirage. I think they're the team that's lost 6 of 7. I'm going to take Texas Tech. And I'll tell you something else about Texas Tech that really impressed me. They are very up and down. But yep. I thought after getting blown out by Baylor and after getting beat by TCU that they were going to fold. They played really well last week against Kansas. So I like, those kids at least play hard. You're going to get their best effort. They're going to play hard. They're banged up a little bit, but I think they're going to beat Iowa State. I do not like the makeup of this Iowa State football team at all. Next one from him, and we're going to skip over one. We're going to go to NC State at Louisville. This is a very intriguing game. Two teams coming off of losses. Obviously, Louisville's was a little bit, you kind of predicted it, right? They were playing Clemson, NC State. Coach ran his mouth a lot last week. Louisville's coach ran his mouth a lot last week. They did get smacked. NC State loses at home to a 2-7 Boston College team. These are two teams that have lost a lot of shine after kind of getting on some hot streaks. Louisville's a 4-point home favorite against number 24 NC State. Ryan, how do you see this one playing out? I'm going with the Cardinals because I think they're at home and I don't think NC State can score. Who are you going with?
I'll take NC State. MJ Morris has done some good stuff over the first couple games. Was a little uneven last week, obviously, but he had a really nice game 2 games ago. Give me NC State just mostly because I don't trust Louisville. That's just all it comes down to, man. Like, this is who do you trust a little more than the other? And I'll just take NC State. At least I know that they're going to play good defense for the most part. MJ Morris makes a couple big plays, but I really could go either way on that one.
Yeah, it's two teams that are playing kind of ugly football, if we're going to be honest about it, right? And, you're talking about Texas Tech and not knowing what to expect one week to the next. That's kind of how I feel about Louisville. We really don't know what to expect from them week to week. They're a very strange team.
Agree.
Now, the one game, and this is going to be the last game that we talk about, Ryan, the one game that Brandon had on there that I think is very fascinating this week is the Iowa at Minnesota game. I cannot believe this. We talked about this on Tuesday night, but we're going to talk about it. We're going to wrap things up here. I cannot believe that Iowa has a flipping chance to win the Big Ten West. That is the most bizarre, ugly conference. You have 4 teams that are 4-3, Purdue, Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota. Illinois, Iowa, and Minnesota all have tough games left coming up. Illinois obviously plays at Michigan today. Then they play at Northwestern, which they should win. Then you have Iowa plays at Minnesota this weekend. They finish at home against Nebraska. If they can pull off, we'll finish it up. Minnesota plays at home against Iowa. Then they play at Wisconsin. And then there's Purdue, who this weekend plays home against Northwestern and then at Indiana. Purdue actually has I would argue, the cleanest path to this as far as who they play. Now, Purdue has the head-to-head does not favor them. So they need all these teams to catch an L the next week for Purdue to be able to win the division because a lot of the head-to-heads don't favor them. But if you look at the schedule, Purdue's the team with the best chance to go 2-0 the next 2 weeks. Iowa, to me, is second if they can beat Minnesota. If they beat Minnesota this weekend, I think Iowa will be will be the Big Ten West champs because they have the head-to-head over Purdue. They have Nebraska at home next week. I do not see Iowa losing that game. This to me is you could see the Big Ten West decided this weekend in this matchup.
Yeah. Well, Brian, so this one, and if you watch the show, I picked Iowa to make the Big Ten championship game. So you know who I'm going to pick here, right? I mean, it's pretty obvious. I think for me, again, Minnesota is one of those teams that is extremely one-dimensional. I know that Tanner Morgan's been banged up. They've had a backup quarterback in there. They're always a team that's going to be able to run the football to a large degree, especially when Mohamed Ibrahim is healthy, obviously. But, I mean, I just look at this team, Brian. I'm just like a one-dimensional team against Iowa's defense. As bad as Iowa's offense has been this year, and it's terrible, Iowa's defense can play. They are a really staunch defense. Jack Campbell and those guys have been very good against the run, just overall good defense. So,
I mean, they're a top 10 defense, Ryan. Would you agree with that? They're one of the 10 best defenses in college football this year, in my opinion. Especially when you consider they're getting no help. No help.
a top 10 defense and one of the worst 2 offenses in the FBS. Like, that's where we are with this, right? In the Power 5, I should say. Like, it's
Who's the
awful.
other?
I don't know. I'm just throwing out a number there because I
No,
don't
I
want to
mean,
say absolutely that they're the worst.
There's a couple in the Big Ten that are in that conversation. I mean,
Rutgers
if
is
we're
in
gonna
that
be honest about it.
conversation.
Northwestern's in that
Oh,
conversation.
Northwestern's very bad. Good call.
Yeah.
Good call on Northwestern.
So if we're going to have a debate about who are the 10 worst offenses in college football, we're going to spend half of our time talking about the Big Ten.
Yes,
so
we are.
There's no doubt about that because it's bad. I think this is a fascinating game, Ryan, because is Tanner Morgan still out? Is he still out for this game?
He didn't play last week, I know. I know he didn't play last week. So.
If he doesn't play, I don't think they have a shot. I mean, I could see Iowa scoring 10 points and winning this game. You know, and here's the thing about Iowa. As bad as they are, they're playing for them. Okay, this is context. Okay, context. Yeah. For them, they're playing their best football of the season. And even offensively, until the Wisconsin game, they had played 2 pretty good games in a row against Northwestern and Purdue. They had almost 400 yards against Northwestern. And Northwestern's defense isn't great, but it's not the reason that they're 1-9. Northwestern's defense has given them a chance to win some football games. And they lost to Miami of Ohio 17-14. They lost to Penn State 17-7. You know, they lost to Ohio State 21-7. I mean, even in some of the games where they gave up a lot of points, they gave up points because their offense could do nothing. Mm-hmm. Their defense has actually played relatively well. I mean, they gave up 31 points to Minnesota last week, right? They only gave up 366 yards of offense. You know, I mean, they've had a couple games. Maryland, Wisconsin ripped them up pretty good, but you know, they gave up 31 points to Southern Illinois and only gave up 357 yards of offense. They've been okay at times this year. Their offense is terrible. So it's bad football. But, you know, last week against Wisconsin was pretty bad, but they still found a way to win by 2 touchdowns over Wisconsin. So I just don't think Minnesota can score on them. And I think Iowa's offense will do enough to get the W. And that's what I think. Now, I don't really have a rooting interest in this one because I just think the division is so bad. But you know, I mean, none of these teams are going to present a very fun matchup. The reason I'm kind of pulling for Purdue is I feel like Purdue can at least score on whoever wins the East to where it's not going to be 42-3. It'll be 42-20. You know what I mean? Yeah. You know, and we won't see a rematch of last week's game or last year's game where Iowa got there and just could do nothing against Michigan, 42-3. I think the same thing would happen this year. You know, it'd be that kind of game again this year because they can't score. So anyway, Ryan, you said you went with Iowa, correct? We're both going with Iowa in this game as well. Yep. Okay. Mm-hmm. So that's going to do it for our game predictions, Ryan. We do have some mailbag questions to get to, but before we do, just a quick reminder, hit that like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this podcast. So Ryan, let's get to we have some mailbag questions here. We're just going to wrap these up, knock these out as quickly as we can, but still giving good answers as best we can as well. Tyler Evans with a couple super chats. Thank you, Tyler. In your opinion, which 4 teams does the College Football Playoff Committee really want in their playoff? Oh, I mean, you want to take a shot at that, Ryan, first? I don't know if I say they want 4 specifically. Yeah. What do you think?
I mean, I was thinking more for like TV ratings, I guess, right? Mm-hmm. I mean,
because that's what it's about.
Alabama, they would love to get Alabama in if they could, right? Because people are going to watch Alabama even if they hate Alabama. Georgia's one, obviously, and they're deserving of being in. Ohio State's another because they present a different type of team. So Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State. The last 4, honestly, they probably want TCU in there, right? Because that's like the great story and people would watch it. No, you don't think so?
No, because the fan base isn't big enough. I don't think they care about stories as much as they care about money. And I don't think TCU brings as much money as Tennessee would, who's got a huge fan base.
Oh, good call.
You know,
and Tennessee still has that great offense too. So that
same thing with Clemson. Same thing with That's why LSU's where they are. They're trying to get LSU within striking distance. That if TCU loses, they can justify putting them up, which will turn a lot of people off of the committee. I mean, I've been a defender of the committee for every year. This is the first year I'm really questioning things that they're doing right now. Like, the only time I've ever really disagreed with the committee was the first year when they put Ohio State in over TCU. Not even because I thought that they got it wrong, but I thought the process was jacked up and how they did it was jacked up. Like, how are you going to have TCU ahead of Baylor 1 week, knowing Baylor already beat TCU? Then Baylor beats Iowa State, or TCU beats Iowa State 55-3, and then somehow you leap Baylor in front of them and say, well, it's because they won the head-to-head. They won the head-to-head 3 weeks ago, right? Like, this doesn't make any sense. And then, you leaped Ohio State in front of them. I just didn't like the process, even though I thought the 4 teams, Ohio State was very good that year. They went on to win the title. It was the way they went about it. Since then, I've agreed with their decisions every year. Some seeding things here and there, Clemson being the one in 2017, I didn't necessarily agree with, but whatever. I thought they got the right 4 teams for most part. This year's the first year I'm like, dude, I'm seeing some really weird stuff in the rankings this year, some really weird stuff. So, I think they want 2 SEC teams is what I think they want. I don't think they're going to force the issue as much, but I think they want. And honestly, I don't think they're opposed to Clemson being in there either. I think because Clemson's got a great fan base. Clemson's still a moneymaker, so I think they want LSU or Clemson to kind of jump in there. I think they want TCU to lose a game so they can justify putting Tennessee in. And I don't think they'd have a problem with Michigan being in. I just don't think they're going to put 2 Big Ten teams in there. I don't. The only way that they'll put 2 Big Ten teams in there is if Ohio State loses. I think Ohio State has a decent case for being in if Notre Dame wins out. That's the thing. That's another team I think they'd like to get in there too. I think part of the reason I think USC has a shot to get in is because they have one of the best remaining schedules. They got to play UCLA, they got to play Notre Dame, and then they got to play either Oregon or Utah. Mm-hmm. If USC runs the table, their only loss will be to a Utah team that this committee clearly thinks very highly of by a point, potentially get a rematch against Utah. They'll have beaten Notre Dame, they'll have beaten UCLA. And 12-1 USC with that market, with the title game being in Los Angeles, what's the best way to get West Coast fans interested in the playoff? Because if USC's not in it, they're not going to give a rip, even if the title game's out there, is to have your team, your hometown team, have a shot to play for the title. I absolutely think they would boost USC up. Now, we could argue, does USC deserve to be in there? We could have that conversation. I personally think if they run the table, they would have a legitimate argument to be in. There's not a lot of teams that are going to be able to beat UCLA, Notre Dame, and then either Utah or Oregon 3 straight games, other than teams that are already going to be in Ohio State, Georgia, that kind of thing. And let's say Ohio State beats Michigan. An 11-1 Michigan with a win over Penn State and then nothing else is going to get in over a USC team who will have beaten Notre Dame, who will have beaten UCLA, who will have beaten either Oregon or Utah? No way. No way. Yeah, no way they're going to be able to justify that. No way. And so now Michigan and USC's resumes now are very similar. Very similar. But USC has a lot left on their schedule that can get them some really impressive results, right? I don't think they're going to do it. At least I don't hope that they don't do it, but I think they have a shot too, and I think the committee would love to put USC in there. Like, I think their dream scenario is that USC is one of the teams that runs the table and that TCU gets knocked off. I do. Tyler Evans, what was your favorite year of recruiting?
This year, because it's my first year covering it. They're easy one.
Yeah. There you go.
I actually don't know off the top of my head. That's an interesting question.
Probably 2013, just watching that class get put together with Jalen Smith and getting Max Redfield late and Cole Luke and Malik Zaire and Greg Bryant and Torian Folston and Will Fuller and just kind of watching that. Mike McGlinchey was in that. That was a heck of a class, man. Good night. That was a heck of a class.
It was, yeah.
But that was probably the one just because you were enjoying the season. And then also you're watching them just land this big recruit after big recruit. And I'll be honest too, Ryan, I wasn't covering the team that year. So I think I kind of enjoy it more as a fan than the ins and outs and the ups and downs and everything kind of going on, I think is where I got it from, I think enjoyed a little bit more that year. So probably that would be my favorite year. Following the 2018 was like the 2008 recruiting class was a little like, it was a great class. It was probably better than the 2013 class. But it got put together during a 3 and 9 years. So it just kind of took some of the fun off of that recruiting class because you're like, God, this team stinks. Yeah. That was probably mine.
2023 has been fun, though, because, when you think about it, Brian, full picture, like this could be a gigantic leap for Notre Dame going forward. Like 2023 class could be a huge part of hopefully the ascension that the program takes, which, I mean, it could be a historic class when all is said and done. I do believe that.
Mm-hmm. Next question from Robert Bishop says, am I detecting a little bit of frustration in the offensive play calling from Brian? Yeah, my sarcasm meter was up pretty high this week. Yeah, I'm very frustrated by it just because it's like, it's simple stuff, man. It's like we're not even asking them to reinvent the wheel or reinvent themselves. It's just stuff that will build on what you're doing. It's just been frustrating, to be honest with you. It's been really and then we see little glimpses of it, and then you're like, okay, build on that, and then they go away from it. Like, it's frustrating. Let's get Irish Blooded asked this question, Ryan. Is there anything you need to see this week in the BC game that you hope they have prepared for next week against USC? Let me answer this, Ryan, and you tell me if you disagree with this. I think that Notre Dame need to get some momentum, but it's not an absolute must because we have seen this team be able to compartmentalize winning and losing. Mm-hmm. And it's been really strange to watch it happen. You watch them play the way they did in back-to-back games against Marshall and Cal, and you're thinking, yeah, defense better be on top of their game next week against North Carolina, and then they just come out and play like gangbusters. Play two really good games in a row against UNLV or against North Carolina and BYU, and then you just play like garbage against Stanford. And there really wasn't anything about the Stanford or UNLV games that gave us any indication that they were going to go into Syracuse and do what they did to Syracuse, right? So this and then you play great against Clemson, you're thinking they've turned the corner, and then you go do what you did against Navy. This team is just – I think they're going to be up for the USC game because – it's the USC game, and that's just what this team does. I think that momentum that we've discussed gives them a better chance of winning. But with this team, Ryan, I don't think there's anything that's an absolute must in regard to if they don't do it, they're going to win, they're going to lose. But I do think momentum is the one thing that they need to give them, and even it enhances their opportunity to go in there and play well offensively next week against USC. What say you?
Yeah. I don't disagree with it. I think that, like you said, this has been a team that has just kind of turned that switch on to play against the best teams. So there's nothing that's a must. I agree with that. It would be nice because I feel like Notre Dame has done a better job of being more sound from a pass coverage perspective. So it would be nice to just see them kind of continue that trend this week, and not give up any big plays off of miscommunication or broken coverage or anything like that, because that would make you nervous going against the USC team, right? Like giving them, because they're a potent passing attack alone, so I don't want to give them anything easy, right? So it would be nice if they just go into Boston College, not have any coverage bust, be consistent, have good eye discipline, like that type of stuff. That'll make me feel better. But to your point, Brian, I don't think that's a must because Notre Dame has turned it on against good teams.
Yep, we're on the same page. Next one from Joseph Hall. Good one, Irish Blooded. Joseph Hall says, what happens if the quarterback is injured in the first quarter? Can Notre Dame win with a second-string quarterback? Notre Dame is already winning with a second-string quarterback. Can Notre Dame win with a third-string quarterback? I mean, honestly, the way that the second-string quarterback has been playing recently, I mean, they don't need the quarterback to – I mean, Steve Angeli can go in there and manage a game, in my opinion, and hand the ball off. And, so can they beat Boston College that way? Yes. Can they beat USC that way? I don't think so. But I don't know if they can beat USC if Drew Pine doesn't play better. I don't think they can do to USC what they did to Clemson. I don't think they can replicate that because this team will be able to score. USC will be able to score. So BC, yes. I mean, honestly, they could beat BC with Ron Paulus Jr. if the defense plays its game. I mean, honestly, he can just turn around and hand the ball. I mean, I'm serious. He can hand the ball off and throw a slide route to Michael Mayer. And they could win 20-13. USC is a different story. It's a different animal in my opinion, right?
Completely agree. I think that, like you said, there is I don't think that this is the right way to go about it, but there is a reality where Notre Dame just runs duo all day and they beat Boston College, right? Like they're good enough to do that, but I don't think that long term that's the best way to go about this football game, but it is possible. For sure. As long as your quarterback doesn't kill you, if he can just manage a game and stay out of his own way and not trip over his own feet, like yes, they are talented enough to beat Boston College, even with their third or fourth stringer, to your point.
Mm-hmm. Next question is from Ed, and Ed says, if I were BC, I'd come out exactly how Navy played defense in the second half and make Pine beat me. Why won't they do that? They don't have anything to lose. Couple reasons. Number one, Ryan, is Navy did that because that's who Navy is.
Right.
Navy also has a very good run defense, which made it easier for them to make Drew Pine beat them. And in the first half, he did, right? I mean,
Mhm.
Drew Pine beat them with his arm because his arm is why they had such a big lead in the first place, right?
Right.
And they struggled to hold on to it. Number one. Number two, they do have something to lose because Notre Dame will have prepared for that all week. This is why you don't just repeat a game plan that happened a week before, because otherwise you could say that why didn't the team that played Oklahoma the next week just repeat what Texas did? Because the team is different. That's
Mhm.
not who BC is. BC's not a heavy stunt pressure type of team, and they don't have the quickness, the foot quickness on the first two levels that Navy has. They're
Right.
bigger, stronger guys. That's not who they are. So they wouldn't be able to replicate that as effectively as Navy did either. And Notre Dame will be
Mhm.
better prepared for it. So that's why. And that's why you don't see teams like, why didn't everybody that played Texas, Alabama after Texas do exactly what Texas did? Because it doesn't work that way. It
Right.
just doesn't work that way in football.
And Boston College also has a lot to lose from their coaching perspective too, because if Jeff
Right.
Hafley has a bad performance, I mean, who knows how long that situation is going to
Yeah.
last.
If they get blown out by Notre Dame, and then last game of the year is an interesting one because they're home against Syracuse.
Well, like goose egg against Syracuse, it's like,
Yeah, he could be out of a job. I mean, I'm
yeah,
serious. Like, which is crazy to think about, given how I thought he started and the hype that they had about him coming in. It could get a little bit ugly. We have a question from our resident Ohio State fan, Archer. It says, Brian, what's the preview for Ohio State and Maryland? I mean, honestly, I just Maryland's kind of back to being who they were.
yes, they look
They start
terrible
off
last week.
6-2. They looked I mean, honestly, and it started over a month ago when they
Mhm.
lost to Purdue at home. They
Mhm.
beat Indiana simply because they have better athletes. They barely beat Indiana. They barely beat Northwestern, won by a touchdown just because they have better athletes. Then they got embarrassed by Wisconsin, just out physicaled by Wisconsin, out physicaled by Penn State. And I think Ohio State is a team to me that I don't know how Ohio State's going to prepare for this game. I don't. I don't know what kind of mental space Ohio State is going to be in. I have a feeling Ohio State's going to kind of come out and rip them apart early. They're on the
Mhm.
road, just kind of come out, be locked in. I think that there's a lot of Michigan love going on right now, and people are kind of picking apart every little thing Ohio State does now. I think Ohio State kind of comes out with a little bit of a chip on their shoulder, and if they don't, I'm going to get a little bit worried about this Ohio State team, to be completely
Mhm.
honest with you, Ryan. So I'm very
Yeah,
curious how they do it, but I just don't think they have a quarterback that's nearly consistent or good enough to do what's needed to be done to do what happened a few years ago when like that Anthony McFarland team just went up and down the field on Ohio State. I
right.
don't think this Maryland team has that all around. Like that team had good pass catchers and a great running back. This team has really good pass catchers, and that's it.
Yep.
And that's why I just don't think Maryland has a chance to be competitive in this game. The only way this is a close game is if Ohio State just
Doesn't
comes
come into
out
play.
like they don't want to be there. Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
Yep. Because I mean, to your point, Maryland can out athlete a lot of teams, but if your recipe to beat Ohio State is to out athlete them, it's probably
And
not
that's
going
why
to
they
work
got
out
smacked
too
by
well.
Penn State last week because Penn State's got
Yeah.
athletes. I mean, they
Oh yeah.
have athletes, and that's why they embarrassed Maryland last week. I mean, really embarrassed Maryland last week.
Yep. That was an ugly game, man. Ugly
Oh,
game.
yeah. Anthony Solomon says, Brian, if the live game works, do you foresee it happening again next year during one of the big games? It just depends on where the big game is at. The reason this particular situation is going to work is because it's a game in California. I'm not going out to California. we're not in a really situation where I can pay people to go out to California, nor would I want to do that. So, and it's after Thanksgiving. So we made the decision to not cover the game live for several different reasons. And so, hey, let's try it. Let's have some fun with it. Is it something that we'll do a lot more next year? Depends on how this goes.
Yep.
I mean, look, this is a business. I mean, we're doing it partly for fun, right? Because we're going to be chatting, texting, and doing all this stuff. It's kind of like what Sean Davis has said. This is going to be a chance for people to kind of get a glimpse into how we communicate during the game. But instead of doing it through text, we're going to be doing it here. But it's not something we're going to necessarily do consistently. I have work to do during games, and this is kind of after Thanksgiving. And, a lot of times for home games, we're at the games. For the Syracuse game, Ryan and I were both there at the game. We couldn't have done it that way. This one is just a bit unique. But again, if it makes enough money, and then there may be a business decision that needs to get made about, okay, what do we do? Because it's also twofold. It's not just, well, this does really well, but what if this does really well, but the post-game show is not as viewed as much because people are already getting our thoughts in this game. Well, the post-game show is our best moneymaker on YouTube. So it's just a lot. I mean, these are business decisions, if I'm going to be completely honest with you, Anthony, and that's kind of the thing you asked is we're going to do it for some fun, but as far as making it, this one we're doing for fun. Making it a permanent thing would have to be because financially it just makes too much sense to not do it. And, that's kind of, I mean, if I'm being completely honest, that's where it's at. Because at the end of the day, we still have a business to run. And I try to make as many decisions I can that are very customer friendly. It's why our prices are what they are. It's why we haven't raised prices. It's why we are, do a lot of things that we do. But at the end of the day, I still have, bills to pay and a business to run. And so if it does well enough, then we'll certainly look at it. Even with all the logistical issues, certainly look at it. Irish Blooded said, do you expect Kenny Minchie to announce at Notre Dame this week? Or is this a visit and then announcement down the road? He's going to, if things go well this weekend, all I'm going to say is we don't expect his recruitment to be drawn out too much. Beyond that, I don't really feel comfortable saying Irish Blooded because then you start kind of getting into the whole, well, now we're kind of giving away some of the secret sauce of what this kid plans to do. And that's just not really what we do. But if things go well, it's not a secret to say if things go well this weekend, we think he's going to pick Notre Dame. That's just kind of obvious. So we're not going to insult you that way, but the particulars we're just not going to get into right now. Rob Didoff with a question. Rob asks Brian and Ryan, when is it the appropriate time to postpone, reschedule an NCAA football game due to bad weather? I always thought the 2016 NC State game should have been rescheduled. Before a team gets on a plane and goes there. I mean, once the team kind of goes there, you're kind of like, okay, barring like a landfall hurricane or a tornado or an earthquake or some like major natural disaster, I think once a team has kind of got on the road and gone, then it is what it is, right? Mm-hmm. Regarding this week's game, there's no reason to cancel this game. I mean, it's football. This isn't baseball. This isn't soccer where the game is impeded by a ton of snow. I don't think the snow is going to be such that it's unsafe to get there, right? Mm-hmm. And if fans can't get there, that's okay. All you really need is the two teams, I mean, they played a whole season with no fans. So by choice. And guess what? They still were able to play football. So as long as it's safe for the teams to get there, then I don't think this game is any danger of it. Nor is Rob necessarily saying that. I'm just inferring a little bit from it. But I mean, I think if weather is a concern, it should happen before the teams get on the plane. Notre Dame should never have been allowed to get on the plane and go play that football game. Yeah. Should never happened. And
it all comes down to safety for me. I mean, if the players, unless it's a situation where your players legitimately have safety concerns for not playing, then that's the only time that a football game should be called off. Like snow. I mean, Brian, I know you were a quarterback, so it might be a little different, right? But like, who doesn't want to play in a snow game, man? Who doesn't want to play in bad weather? Like, I know, that's what I'm saying. Aside from the quarterbacks in the room, like as a linebacker, defensive player, I'm like, man, I want it to snow. I want it to be cold. I don't want to wear sleeves. Like, that's the stuff, man.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, you need your hand warmer and
no, I had to one like around, like swing it around like I'm cool when I'm ready to put my hand under the center. No, it's no fun. No fun. All right. Irish Shytown says, Brian, which college football teams have surprised you the most this season? Ryan, do you want to take a first crack at that one?
I mean, it's got to be TCU, right? Like that's number one. I thought they'd be better under Sonny Dykes because the offense was just so bad over the last couple years.
Great hire. Yes, but I thought maybe tap out at 9-3, great hire, Ryan. Not like 8-4 probably. But
yeah, I was thinking 8-4. I was like 7-5, 8-4 first year. That's a great starting point, right? Mm-hmm. But now we're talking about them potentially being in the college football playoff. Like it's insane, man. So it starts with TCU. When I originally saw this question, I thought that's CFL teams. I'm like, Canadian football still happening?
Sorry, don't have an opinion on that, buddy.
I know Nathan Rourke's really good for what that's worth. But I mean, TCU, man, that's the number one. For me. UCLA, I thought UCLA would be pretty good this year, but they have played even better
I need to see how they
thought.
first, Ryan. That's
Yeah.
my thing. I need to see how UCLA finishes first before I can say that they're a surprise. Because they're 8-2 right now. They play USC at home and then at Cal. If they lose at home to USC, even if they beat Cal next week, you're like, they went 9-3. That's a 1-game improvement on last year, right?
Sure.
So I gotta see them. I gotta see them finish. I think same with Washington, right? Like part of me wants to say Washington because I knew they had players, but okay, do they beat Colorado and Washington State these next 2 weeks? Or if they do lose to Washington State, this is at least a close game and they finish 9-3. That's a really good turnaround that I thought they'd win because they had talent, but I thought like 7-5, 8-4, 9-3 is not that much of an upgrade over that. But if they go 10-2, all of a sudden you're like, yo, they did some things like that I thought that they weren't capable of. So, and I'll be honest, go ahead.
I was just going to say 2 surprises in a bad way because surprise just ask for a surprise. Surprise does not have to be a positive, right? One is Jimbo Fisher with Texas A&M. I did not think they were going to be this bad.
We thought they were overrated, but we thought 8-4, 7-5 was what
I thought that was the bar for them. 8-4, maybe 9-3. Like, cool. The other one's Oklahoma. I mean, I didn't think they were going to be great, but I didn't think they would be this bad, man. Like, they're a bad football team.
USC, if they win out, will be there for me. If even if they lose the Pac-12 title game and go 11-2, that's a big surprise. I thought they'd be more of an 8-4 team. Now, what they've been aided, and this is why I say I need to see the next couple weeks play out, because if they lose these next 2 games, then they're pretty much right where I thought they'd be because there's been some teams in the league that are down. And so I need to see how the season finishes so there's some Pac-12 teams that to me are up in the air. I'll even say Tennessee's a surprise for me. Now, we predicted a breakout season for Tennessee. We thought they'd have they were my surprise team of the year, but they've surprised me even more. They've been even better than I thought that they were going to be, Ryan. I think that's another one, even though they were our kind of our breakout pick. And look, I'll give credit where credit is due. LSU's been better record-wise than I thought they'd be. I did not think they'd be sitting at 8-2 in the West Champs. I did not think they're going to be Bama. So props to Brian Kelly for getting that team, kind of rolling. And now they've benefited from, they've had some good luck. If we're going to be completely honest with you, you have to be real about that. They had some good luck in that Arkansas was just a completely devastated team by the time they played. There's some other teams in the division that just aren't that good. The schedule hasn't been that tough. Florida's not as good as people thought, right? That they might be. But beating Ole Miss and Alabama in back-to-back games is not something I thought that team was capable of. I did predict them to beat Ole Miss, but I did not think they were going to then go beat Alabama. So props to them. They're a surprise. Now, again, they got to finish, but I expect them to beat UAB and Texas A&M. If they lose one of those 2 games, then all of a sudden it takes a lot of the shine off. Is there anybody else that's been kind of a negative? Nebraska just completely fall on their face again surprised me. I'm not going to lie to you. I thought Nebraska had a chance to, the way that they lost games last year, they were competitive. They got some transfers in. The kid from TCU that we've talked about, the DN from TCU that was their best pass rusher last year, went to Nebraska. Casey Thompson's not great, but you kind of realize maybe Adrian Martinez wasn't the problem. It really was Scott Frost that was the problem. I mean, they're bad. And they're bad. They're really bad.
Arkansas is a disappointment for me. I know they've been riddled with injury, but they just have not been great.
See, that's why they're kind of an asterisk for me, Ryan, because of that. He's in year 3. I don't expect the roster to be in such a great place that they can handle all the injuries that he's had to deal with.
It's fair.
That's why I'm going to give him a little bit of a pass this year.
You literally lost Arkansas at some points this year. You lost your 2 most important football players. You lost your quarterback, and then Jalen Catalon was your best defensive player by far coming into the season, and he's been out the majority of the year too. So it's been tough for Pittman.
North Carolina's a team that was my breakout. They were a team, not breakout. They were a team that we said in the offseason, Ryan, could be a surprise team on the schedule. I didn't think 11-1 run away with the Coastal was that. I mean, they're a surprise team for me. But the biggest surprise for me, there's one good and one bad. The big surprise for me in the ACC is Mike Elko and the job he's done at Duke. Even if they lose their next 2 games, 7-5 is a huge improvement over what they were. And I don't think they're going to lose both of their next 2 games. I think Duke's going to at least, at worst, go 1-1 against Pitt and Wake Forest. So he's done a phenomenal job. And surprisingly, the negative is I predicted Miami to win the Coastal.
They've been bad,
and they're terrible.
Yeah.
And they may not be bowl eligible, Ryan.
That's
I mean, there's
wild,
a legitimate chance that Miami is not going to be bowl eligible this year. Think about it. They're 5-5 right now. They play Clemson this weekend, and then they play Pitt at the end of the season. It's not a given that a physical team like Pitt, because one thing I'll say about Pitt, they have issues. They're a physical football team.
Mm-hmm.
And Miami has
Always
not
are.
handled that very well. They have not handled physicality very well. So, and if what you and I think may happen, which is this team is going to kind of pack it in, they're going to lose to Pitt in the last game because there's going to be nobody at that game. If they get beat by Clemson, there's going to be nobody at that game. Like we could get sideline tickets for $10 at that. I would be one, you know what I mean? Bet you a day of if we wanted to go to that game, which I wouldn't.
Dude, Miami fans are some of the loudest on Twitter, and then they never go to the games. It's so funny.
Yeah. Well, and then they get real quiet when their team sucks, right? Because that's what Miami fans do. They're front runners. Florida State, if they win out, which they have a great shot of doing against Louisiana and Florida, is a year ahead of schedule for me for what I thought Mike Norvell could do. I thought he'd be like an 8-4 year this year, and then but 9-3 with a blowout win over Miami, beating LSU. Florida State's been a really good team this year. They got to finish though, because if they finish the year with 2 SEC wins, think about what that's going to do for their recruiting.
Yep.
Like, we got 2 SEC wins this year. You know what I mean? Like that's going to be, and a blowout win over Miami. That could be it. So those are some of the teams, Ryan, for me that have been good surprises. Not a lot, not too many. Just you mentioned Oklahoma. They're Virginia Tech being this bad is a little bit of a surprise. I didn't think they'd be very good. I thought they'd be like a 6-6 kind of team. They're really bad. They're really, really bad.
They're going to upset Liberty this week, says me.
They need it. They need it. They really need it. Outside of that, some of the other surprises are more just individual units. I didn't think Iowa's offense would be this bad. I didn't think they'd be good, but I didn't think they'd be this bad. But nothing else has really shocked me a ton, to be honest with you. I mean, at Pac-12.
Can you believe we are sitting here and Virginia Tech is a 10-point underdog to Liberty? Like, can that sink in for a second? That is absurd, man. I saw that line, and I'm just like, I understand that Virginia Tech's terrible, but like we are at a point in our life that Liberty is a 10-point favorite over Virginia Tech. I just can't fathom that.
It's not, I mean, and yeah, it's a home game for Liberty, but look, Lynchburg and Roanoke aren't that far apart.
Right.
No, you're absolutely right. There's no excuse, no justification for that to be the case. No. And it's actually a 10-point game. I didn't even look. It's down to 9.
Okay. I got it at 10.
No, that's bad. No, I'm saying that's really not any better.
No.
Wow. Guess I mean there's only been enough betting on Virginia to swing that by a point. Oh my goodness. That's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. Okay. That was a good question, Irish Chi-Town. Robert Bishop, is Jurkovec playing or is it the Moorhead kid? They haven't announced that yet, but the latest that we heard was that Jurkovec was doubtful. Now, is that legit or is that Jeff Hafley playing mind games? I don't know the answer to that, but I'd be a little surprised if Jurkovec played, to be completely honest with you. I really would. Robert Bishop also asks or says, and then kind of asks, I think Brent Venables is a great defensive coordinator and a good recruiter, but I don't think he's a very good head coach. Agree or disagree?
I literally said the same thing, Robert, when the hire happens. It's nothing against Brent Venables. Some guys are great defensive coordinators and just not head coaches. For whatever reason, he never gave me a vibe of like head coach, CEO. Like that's just not the vibe he gives off to me. Now, if he fails at Oklahoma, there will be many teams that will be suitors for Brent Venables to come run their defense. Great defensive guy, really good defensive mind. I just don't think he's a head coach. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just what I think.
Yeah. Now, again, it's early, and we have seen guys that had never been head coaches before struggle early. Dabo struggled early, but the concern I had was I didn't think he had the temperament to be a head coach.
Right.
That's the concern. And Dabo had the temperament to be a head coach. He's a rah-rah guy. Brent Venables is a little out there. He's
Yes,
got
he
some like
is.
Bob Diaco to him. You know what I mean, Ryan? Like he's got like, what did he say? What are they going to shove in their mouths? What? Like, you
Water
remember
hose.
that?
Water
Yeah.
hose, yeah. Oh, fire
Yeah.
hose. It was a fire hose in their
Yeah.
mouth. Yeah.
Like, okay, dude, do you know what a fire hose would do to your face? You know what I mean? Like,
You would not be
just
looking
he just
pretty
says
after that.
he
Yeah.
does some really weird things, and you're just like, dude, I don't know if this guy's got it. But again, it's early yet, and I don't want to completely
He's
write
early.
him off. He's, it's been a rough year. He lost a lot of players to the portal because of Lincoln Riley took a lot of dudes and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, I get it, but they've been underwhelming. But I'll say this: he did show me here's why I'm not ready to go there yet, Ryan. Because when they had lost some games, consecutive games, and got embarrassed in doing so, he kind of went into the team. The report is that he went into the team and was like, kind of went off on him. If you don't want to be here, leave. And they responded with a really good performance the next week against Kansas and then beat Iowa State the next week. So he showed me the ability to rally the troops for a time. And then, of course, they lost at home to Baylor and then lost to West Virginia. So it was like a really brief, like, okay, you got them back going for a minute. And, but then they kind of faded again. So, but overall, I'm just not I'm not a believer, but I'm at least willing to say, hey, let's give them at least 2 years to kind of put at least some bit of a stamp on them a little bit. So, and then the last one, Ryan, here, we're going to end with a hot take from Brandon Plensner. His hot take is Notre Dame will finish with a better record than USC. So right now, USC is 9-1. Notre Dame is 7-3. So what this would have to be is Notre Dame wins their next 3 games, including a win over USC, and they would win their bowl, which would include their bowl game. It also would mean that USC is going to lose the rest of the games they have left. That means lose to UCLA, lose to Notre Dame, and then lose a bowl game. Neither is out of the question. I just feel like with USC's firepower, they're going to at least get one of them. Especially, Ryan, if they lose to UCLA and Notre Dame, because then they won't get as good of an opponent in a bowl game.
Right.
Like, I will say that.
You could sell me that they end with the same record. Well, not the same record because they've been in the Pac-12 championship, right? But you could sell me that they would both have 10 wins at the end of the season, and I would believe you because I think that Notre Dame definitely can win the last 2 games. And I think that they have it depends what the draw is, but we'll see what happens. I mean, USC, I think it's not going to happen because I think USC is going to win this week against UCLA. So I think it's going to probably push to 11 wins is most likely USC for me. But it's not out of the realm possibility. I just think that it's highly unlikely.
I don't know if I'd say highly unlikely. I'm not predicting it because, again, you and I both predicting USC to win this weekend, which eliminates that as an option unless – I mean, yeah, there's no way. There's no way Notre Dame can get in the college football. The only way Notre Dame could do it with USC winning this weekend is if the most insane stuff happens the next 2 weeks. Michigan loses to – I mean, it would just have to be – you have to Michigan loses to Illinois and Ohio State. Clemson loses to Miami this week and then beats North Carolina. LSU gets beat by UAB or A&M and Georgia. You know what I mean? Like, so much TCU would have to lose twice for Notre Dame to have any kind of chance. Like, I don't know if there's enough craziness for Notre Dame to get in the playoff. And I think that would be the only way Notre Dame could get more than USC because they'd need the extra game.
Right.
And I just don't think that. I don't think it's going to happen, but
the conference championship element throws a wrench into the hot take. But I respect it, Brandon.
Because they could lose this weekend to UCLA and still get in the conference championship game, right? It's not out of the possibility that happens, right?
Exactly.
So, Yep.
They're just going to have more cracks at it. More cracks at it, and they have a couple games over Notre Dame right now, so it makes it tough.
So, Tommy Guns really, really wants this question answered, Ryan. John Madden, Paul Brown, Vince Lombardi, and Newt Rockne. Rank them in order. That's good. Want them as a coach for just 1 year.
On the college level or NFL level?
I don't want any of those guys right now for the modern game. I mean, all of them they're all passed away. No, I'm in all seriousness though. You know, the one that I would probably go with, Ryan, is Paul Brown, because he ran the
Number
most
one.
modern offense.
Yeah.
I mean, he's
He
the
did.
guy that kind of gave Bill Walsh the sort of the impetus to kind of develop the West Coast a little bit.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? So that's probably the where I'd go, is because he's the guy that is the closest to John Madden's probably second in regard to guys that run an offense that would be the most translatable.
Oh, you don't want to? I mean, come on, man. But Lombardi be like, "We're gonna make a seal here and a seal here. We're gonna hit the out."
Yeah.
No.
I would love for Notre Dame to actually do things where they're pinning and pulling and creating seals. That'd be phenomenal, right? But
horsepower trap or whatever you called that play.
Yeah. So no. I mean, yeah, I'd probably go with Paul Brown or Madden. You know, as long as they're bringing the coaching staffs that they had with them, it'd be the close. Because I could say, okay, give me Paul Brown, and then my offensive coordinator is a young Bill Walsh. You know, so
I'd probably go John Madden.
John Madden.
Yeah. I'm a big vertical passing game guy. They like to do that stuff back then,
now,
you know?
Keep in mind who you'd be doing the vertical passing game with right now.
It's all right.
So I might have to change my opinion and go Newt Rockne. Nope, I've changed my opinion. I'm going Newt Rockne. Nope. Time out.
Run the triple option, huh? Option.
Nope. They do not run the triple option. What are you talking about?
Single wing. What do they run back then?
Basically, it's 4 running backs. Give me 4 running backs. I'm gonna have Chris Tyree taking the snap. My Estime, they're gonna do the shift with Estime, Diggs, and I'm gonna go. Let's see here. Who's my 4th guy gonna be? It's not going to be Jabron Payne because he's a young buck. I'm going to preserve the season of eligibility. I'm going Braden Lindsey's going to be my 3rd back. He's my speed.
You're going to run double. Yep. Are you running the full house, or are you running like a double tights power eye? I'm not double tight, double wing power eye.
Dude, do you not know what Newt Rockne did? I mean, come on, man.
I remember Newt, man. I've seen the videos. I've seen the videos.
You know, they're not doing any of those things. What I'm saying is this, however, is for the personnel of the Notre Dame football team to get your best 11 on the field, you got to take the quarterback off. That's all I'm saying, right?
Could you imagine?
And they don't use Ryan, they don't use the receivers anyway. You know what I mean? So they can still they can have one receiver outside. So give me Tobias outside, give me Michael Mayer at tight end, and then give me Lindsey, Estime, and Diggs at running back, and then give me Chris Tyree as my single wing quarterback.
Could you imagine the triple option with?
They didn't run the triple option.
Back? Could you imagine it?
I will say this. I will say this.
Yes,
Audric Estime would have been a monster in Lou Holtz's offense. A monster. Like, could you imagine if they were running it wasn't the triple option, it was the power option. Okay. They did it out of the eye. Okay.
Yes.
They weren't running the veer. But could you imagine though, if they had I'll take a guy that you like. Jeff Sims at court. Now, I don't like Jeff Sims for this off, but Jeff Sims and Lou Holtz's offenses, athletic, big arm. And that's kind of what he liked, right? But if you could take him at quarterback with Audric Estime at fullback, and then Logan Diggs and Chris Tyree as your rotation at running back, because Lou loved using a speed guy, and then you'd have Braden Lindsey to one side and Tobias Merriweather on another side, and then you have Michael Mayer at tight end. You know what I mean? Like, you get some really great option plays where Chris Tyree is getting the speed options, or they're going speed option right, and all of a sudden you're flipping it to Braden Lindsey on a reverse. Whoo, boy. Throwing the play-action bombs at Tobias and Deion Colsey and Michael Mayer. I mean, this is a team that's built better for that than we've seen at Notre Dame in a long time, because of the unique nature of their running backs. Because in the 80s and early 90s, Audric would have been a fullback.
100%.
He would have been a Jerome Bettis type of fullback, 1,000-yard runner as a fullback, a Ray Zellers type of fullback. There's no doubt about it. That'd have been fun to watch. That'd have been really fun to watch. A whole lot of fun to watch. So anyway, all right. So that's going to do it for today's show, everybody. I want to appreciate everybody for being with us. We will be back tomorrow, 10 a.m. Sean Stiers and Vince D'Addario will have our countdown to kickoff, so do not miss that. Ryan and I and some others will be back for the post-game show after Notre Dame beats Boston College. I know I'm being a bit presumptuous there, but I think that they will. So we're going to do our best to stay warm tomorrow, at least myself and my wife. My wife's going to have to actually be outside shooting the game a little bit tomorrow. So she's going to do her best to be warm. I'll do my best to be warm walking into the stadium. And then, of course, Sunday night, we'll try our best to have our post-game show and make it all happen that way. So for Ryan, I'm Brian. Thanks to everybody. Like, subscribe, notifications, share, message boards, board.irishbreakdown.com, 5-star review. Check out the Built Bars. Great deal. Get 10% off your purchase. Check out the merch store. We've had a lot of people buying merch lately. Sold a lot of hoodies this month, Ryan. People getting ready for the cold weather. So definitely want to get those as well. So everybody have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you again soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.